The Nantes Revolution Rignier, Paimboeuf landlords and travelers Jacomedy, the native of La Guadeloupe and his wife, gull shooting, axiom for seabird shooting, the captain of La Pauline woman and swallow lovers superstition, getting under sail. Nantes, like Paris, had had its revolution, its Ragus, who had given orders to fire upon the people, and its people who had crushed Ragus. They pointed out houses to me that were almost as much marked as the Louvre or the Institut. The firing was so well maintained by the royal troops that a young man named Petty had from a single discharge received 3 bullets in his arm, 1 in his chest, and a gunshot wound right down his face. The latter had been fired from a window by a compatriot of his. The wounded man was recovering well, but one of his friends who had only received a charge of buckshot was at the point of death. If he died, he would make the 11th who had lost his life in that secondary affray. Rignier, who was at that time a charming comedian and who later became one of the main pillars of the Comédie Française, happened to be at Nantes at the time, giving a series of representations that were much run after. I spent 2 or 3 days in the midst of old recollections of the Revolution, renewed for me by M. Villeneuve, who, as we know, nearly played the part of victim in the great drama composed by the Convention, which was put into action by Carrier. If there is a name on earth execrated by the public, it is that of Carrier. I left Nantes for Paimboeuf. I had only seen the sea at Havre, where I was told it scarcely deserved the name, so I was curious to behold a real sea, a stormy sea, one which even sailors call la mer sauvage. I do not know anything more melancholy on earth than that band of houses, called Paimboeuf, which fringes the Loire for 500 or 600 yards. One seems to be 1,000 miles from Paris, and outside the pale of civilization, confronted with these brave fellows who live by a river as wide as a sea almost, and who seem occupied with nothing outside the mending of their nets and going fishing. I wondered how the revolutions of the Parisian crater could possibly matter to them, seeing that its lava could not reach them, nor could they ever see even its flame or smoke. But that did not matter to them, for at Paimboeuf they were boldly talking of another Vendean insurrection. Furthermore, the distance that separates Paimboeuf from Paris makes the very essentials of life of such a price as is beyond the conception of people in the central provinces of France to realize. The traveler who has heard of the cheapness of its fish, of lobsters being sold at 6 to 8 sous, turbots at 2 francs and skates, which no one will eat, and shrimps being flung at your feet, is laboring under a mythical delusion. For him, the prices at inns are very nearly the same all over. North, south, east, and west, landlords adopt an even tariff which never lets the traveler come off too well in the matter of expenses. We dined at the Philippe of the place, which was called Jacomedy. Our table d'hôte dinner cost us 50 sous, only between 10 to 20 sous difference between other table d'hôte tariffs all over the kingdom. At this meal near me, a young, sad-looking woman was dining, or rather was not dining, for she ate nothing. Her husband, on her right hand, was attending to her with the solicitude of a lover, and yet every few minutes the breast of the lovely one in distress would heave with sobs, tears would come to her eyelids, and in spite of her efforts to restrain them, they rolled down her cheeks. I could not refrain from listening to the conversation of my 2 neighbors. I soon learnt that the young man was a native of Guadeloupe, and had just married this charming young woman from the neighborhood of Tours, whom he was transplanting from the garden of France to that of the Antilles. The poor child, apart from the confidence which she had just placed in that blind side of life which we call the future, knew nothing of the country to which she was going, and until she could have children who would suck her milk and dry her tears, she mourned for the friends and relatives she was leaving behind in the old land of Europe, and probably for the old continent itself too. At the same table was dining the captain of the vessel which was to take the young married pair overseas, and it was from him that I learnt most of these details. They were to set sail the next day. I asked his leave to go on board and to stay till his ship sailed, which he readily granted me. The boat was at anchor between Paimboeuf and Saint-Nazaire, and was called La Pauline. She was a pretty 3-masted trader with very graceful lines, and of 500 or 600 tons. I did not say anything of my plan to my 2 neighbors, certain that, indifferent to them as I was, the next day at the moment of leaving I should become even more to them than a fellow countryman, namely, a friend. I spent the rest of that day by the river banks shooting at ordinary gulls and black-headed gulls, amazed that they did not fall. A native sportsman, amused at my disappointment, whom I approached to question as to whether the Loire, like the Styx, had the property of rendering invulnerable the men and animals which bathed in its waters, informed me to my great surprise that, for want of the knowledge of measuring maritime distances, I was firing from double the ordinary length of range. He laid down the following rules as essential. Never fire at a seabird unless you can distinctly see its eye. When you see its eye, its body is within range of your lead. I instantly applied this maxim to practice. I waited patiently. I let a gull come near enough for me to see its eye distinctly like a little black speck. Then I fired, and the bird fell. The purveyor of these counsels bowed and continued his shooting, pleased with himself for having taught something to a Parisian. I reproduced the lesson just as it was given me. One cannot spread abroad a truth too widely, no matter whether small or great. I forget which philosopher it was who said that, if he had his hands full of truths, he would have them surrounded by a circle of fire for fear he should open them absent-mindedly, and let the truths escape. I should open both my hands and blow the truths abroad with all my might. Nothing flies so slowly and haltingly as the real truth. But, as a truth always costs something to somebody, the one I have just divulged cost the life of 3 or 4 great gulls. Upon my return to the hotel, I did not see our bride and bridegroom. They had retired into their own room. After 8 o'clock in the evening, at the end of September, there are not many diversions in Paimboeuf, so I followed the example of the young couple and retired to my room, giving orders that I was to be waked in time to take advantage of the first ship's boat that was going out to La Pauline. The captain himself knocked at my door. I think the worthy man had, during the night, under the sweet and deceiving dew of sleep, let the hope spring up in his heart of taking me on the voyage with him. He extolled the delights of a long voyage on board a good vessel, spoke of his cook, whom he rated far higher than Jacomedes's, and praised his table, which was unrivaled by any other than that of the Rocher de Cancale in Paris. The captain had dined once at the Rocher de Cancale, and he never missed a chance of putting in a good word as to the excellence of Borel's cuisine. It was still lovely late summer weather, and as I simply meant to pay a short call on La Pauline, I was clad only in nankeen trousers, a white pique waistcoat and a velvet jacket. These details, as will soon be seen, are not without their importance to those who have learnt to their cost what it is to suffer from cold. This was the first time I had seen at such close quarters a ship that was on the point of sailing. I had indeed been over 1 or 2 steamers at Havre that were bound for Boston or New Orleans, but the elegance of these boats, which are fitted up for carrying passengers, makes them seem more like hotels, like furnished apartments, and like the corridors of theaters than like ships. But the Pauline, on the contrary, was a thoroughbred three-master. I examined every little thing about her with a curiosity that enabled me to hope that some day, if occasion offered itself, I might be able to write novels connected with the sea, like Cooper's, or, at any rate, like those of Eugene Sue. I was in the full flush of my examination when the boat came alongside for the second time, bringing the young couple and their luggage. The young wife made no attempt to restrain her tears, but wept abundantly and openly. So she did not see me come towards the starboard companion, and when I gave her my hand to help her from the ladder to the bridge, she uttered a little cry of surprise. "Ah, monsieur," she said, "are you also going to Guadeloupe?" "Alas, no, madame," I said. "Greatly to my regret I am not, but it is precisely because I am remaining behind that you find me here." "I do not understand you, monsieur." "I noticed your sadness, and know that you are leaving those who are very dear to you. Therefore, as I am a fellow countryman of yours, I thought I would take your last messages to your friends." "Oh, monsieur," she said, "how good of you." And she looked at her husband, as if to ask him how far she might enter into a conversation of this nature with a stranger. He smiled and held out his hand, and with one quick glance gave his wife leave to do what she liked. "Yes," he said, "be so good as to take my dear Pauline's last farewell messages to her family, and tell her mother especially, if you see her, that in less than 3 years' time we will come back and pay her a visit." "3 years," murmured the young wife dubiously. "And tell this foolish child, monsieur," he went on, kissing his wife's forehead, "that it is easier to get to and from Guadeloupe now than it was in old days to get to St. Cloud. I am not yet 30, and I have already made a dozen voyages between Pointe-à-Pitre and Nantes." "Yes, my dear, you tell me that now, but 1,800 leagues is a long way." 6 weeks' voyage, that isn't much surely." I pointed out to the young wife a swallow which was skimming about the masts. "That bird takes just such a voyage twice a year, madame," I said to her, guided by its instinct alone. "Yes, but it is a bird," she said, sighing. I tried to give a fresh turn to the conversation. "Monsieur," I said to the husband, "I heard you addressing Madame as Pauline. La Pauline is the name of the boat on which we are standing. Is it a mere coincidence, or by your own selection that the names are the same?" "It was my own choice, monsieur. There were 3 or 4 ships in the river, and I decided on this one. I thought that besides her saintly patron I would give her one in addition. Are you amused at my superstition?" "Not at all, monsieur, quite the reverse. I appreciate all superstitions, particularly those which have love as their basis. It has always seemed to me impossible to love sincerely without feeling vague terrors on behalf of the beloved object that make even the stoutest-hearted a prey to superstitious feelings." The young wife listened to me for a little while. "Oh, monsieur," she then began, holding out her hand, "what a kind idea it was of yours to see us off. I hope then, madame, that you will depute me to carry any last messages to your family. I wrote to my mother this morning, monsieur, but if you happen to be stopping at Tours and have a little time to spare, be so good as to inquire for the house of Madame 1000, and tell her you met us and saw us on the ship, and that you were witness," she smiled rather doubtfully, "that Leopold promised to bring me back to France in 3 years' time." "I will tell her, madame, and I will undertake to be surety for your husband's word." Meantime, operations were taking place on board preparatory to sailing. The wind was east-southeast, just right for sailing out of the river. They had only been waiting for the tide to turn before making a quick start with the combined assistance of both wind and tide. Thus, all of a sudden, the captain's voice made us start. The pilot had just arrived from Saint-Nazaire, and the captain was issuing his first order: "Heave short at the anchor." At this unexpected order, the poor traveler seemed as though she realized for the first time that she must actually leave France. She uttered a little cry, and threw herself on her husband's breast and burst into sobs. I took advantage of this renewed outflow of tears to quit the newly married pair, and to tell the captain I was ready to return to shore at his convenience. "Eh," he said, "are you in such a hurry to leave us? I had counted on keeping you to luncheon and to dinner, or at any rate to luncheon. For," he added, looking at the sky, "I doubt there won't be many passengers dining today." "Good," I replied, "but when at sea, how did you propose to get rid of me?" "The easiest way imaginable. You would have returned to land with the coasting pilot." "Stop, is that really possible?" "Everything is possible that one wants very much." "Well then, I will have luncheon with you." "Then you will not leave us until we get to Piliers. You will return with the pilot, to whom you can give a crown piece, and you will pass for an Englishman who wanted a taste of seasickness." "Done, arrange matters with him for me." He called to the pilot, spoke a few words to him in a whisper, pointed me out with a glance, and the pilot nodded in sign of acquiescence. "There," said the captain, "that matter is fixed up all right." Then, addressing the sailors who had been heaving the anchor apic, he said, "Up aloft with you, and let go the topsails and the courses, the jibs and the spanker." "Ah, captain," I said, "do not go and serve me the trick that Bougainville did to his friend the Cure of Boulogne." "Oh, no fear of that. Besides, I am not going all round the world." Lastly, turning to his men, he shouted, "Get ready to hoist and haul in the topsails." The story of Bougainville and the Cure of Boulogne is a popular one in the French Navy, and as you see, the captain answered me just as a communicant answers a question on the catechism. Now, as it is quite possible that my reader may not be a sailor, and that ladies, in particular, may be quite unacquainted with the legend to which I have just referred, I will tell in as few words as possible the story of Bougainville and the Cure of Boulogne. Then we will return to our 2 Paulines. Chapter 10. Story of Bougainville and his friend, the Cure of Boulogne. On 14 November of the year 1766, an open carriage, drawn by post horses, containing 3 naval officers, one seated on the front seat and the other 2 on the back one, which signified a decided difference in their rank, was driving along the Bois de Boulogne, coming from the Barrière de l'Étoile and going towards the Avenue de Saint-Cloud. By the Château de la Muette, it passed a priest who was walking slowly along in one of the sidewalks reading his breviary. "Hi, postilion," shouted the officer sitting at the back of the carriage, stop a moment please." The postilion stopped. This request, given in a loud voice, and the noise the postilion made pulling up his horses, naturally led to the priest raising his head and fixing his eyes on the carriage and its 3 occupants. "Pardieu, I am not mistaken," said the officer sitting behind. "It is really you, my dear Ramai." The priest gazed in astonishment. However, his face gradually cleared as light dawned on him, and his lips turned from amazement to smiles. "Ah," he said at length, "it is you. Why you vous? It is thou toy then, Anton." "Yes, it is I, Anton de Bougainville." "Mon Dieu, what have you been doing with yourself during the 25 years since we parted?" "What have I been doing with myself, dear friend?" repeated Bougainville. "Come and sit down by me a few minutes and I will tell you." But the priest looked round him uneasily, as though he were afraid to go far away from his home. Bougainville understood his fear. "Do not be anxious, we will go at a walking pace," he replied. A valet got down from the seat behind and lowered the step. "It is 11:15, said the priest, "and Marian expects me for dinner at 12. In the first place, where do you live? But sit down, though." He lightly drew the priest by his gown, and the priest sat down. "Where do I live?" asked the latter. "Yes. At Boulogne, I am cure of Boulogne, friend." Ah, I offer you my congratulations, you always had the vocation. So you see, I entered orders. Are you satisfied?" "Enchanted, my friend. The cure of Boulogne is not one of the best. It only has an income of 800 livres, but my tastes are modest, and there still remain 400 livres over to give away to the poor." "Good Ramai, you can go at a slow trot, so that we lose as little time as possible." The postilion set the horses to the required pace, which, moderate though it was, none the less brought a cloud of distress on the cure's countenance. "Set your mind at rest," said Bougainville, "seeing we are going in the direction of Boulogne." "Friend," the Abbé Ramai said, laughing, "I have been cure of Boulogne for 20 years. Marian has been 15 years with me, and never, except when detained by the side of a dying parishioner, have I been 5 minutes later than 12. Punctually at 12 the soup is on the table, and, you understand. Yes, don't be afraid, I do not want to upset Marian. You shall be home exactly by 12. Now my mind is easy. But talk about yourself a little. Are you not wearing the uniform of the Navy?" "Yes, I am captain of a ship." "How comes that about? I thought you were a barrister, really. When you left college did you not begin to study law?" "What is to be done, my dear Ramai? You, God's anointed, ought to know better than anyone the proverb. Man proposes, and God disposes. It is true I was entered as a barrister in 1752 at the High Judicial Court of Paris." "Ah, I knew it," said the good priest, withdrawing the finger from his breviary, which marked the place where he had left off reading. "So you did become a barrister." "Yes, but at the same time that I was called to the bar," continued Bougainville, "I enlisted in the musketeers." "Oh, indeed, you always had a taste for arms and a special talent for mathematics. You remember that?" "Why, of course, was I not your best friend at college?" "Ah, that is very true." "Is it you, or your brother Louis, who belongs to the academy?" Bougainville smiled. "It is my brother," he said. "Or rather, it was, for you must know that I had the misfortune to lose him 3 years ago." "Ah, poor Louis, but what can you expect? We are all mortal, and it is well to look upon this life as a voyage which leads us to port. Pardon, friend, it seems to me we are passing Boulogne." Bougainville looked at his watch. "Bah," said he, "what does it matter? It is only 11:30, and consequently you have still a good 20 minutes before you. Faster, postilion." "Why faster?" "Because you are in a hurry, my friend." Bougainville. "What? Does not the wish to know what I have been doing outweigh your fear of upsetting Marian by being 5 minutes late? That is a queer sort of friendship, to be sure." "You are right, upon my word, 5 minutes more or less. Tell me about yourself, my dear Anton. Besides, when I tell Marian that it was for you and through you I am late, she will stop scolding." "Marian knows me then." "Knows you? Of course she does. I have spoken to her of you a score of times. But be quick and finish telling me how it is that, having been called to the bar, and after enlisting in the musketeers, I find you a naval officer. It is very simple, and I can explain it all to you in a word. In 1753, I became assistant major in the provincial battalion of Picardy. The following year I was appointed aide-de-camp to Chevert, whom I left to become secretary to the embassy in London, and to be made a member of the Royal Society. In 1756, I went as captain of dragoons with the Marquis of Montcalm, charged with the defense of Canada. Capital, capital, interrupted the Abbe Ramai. I can see you doing it. Go on, my friend, I am listening. The Abbe, completely fascinated by Bougainville's narrative, had not noticed that the horses had quietly passed from a slow to a quick trot. Bougainville continued his story. When in Canada, I was pretty much master of my future. I had but to conduct myself well to attain to anything. I was put in charge of several expeditions by the Marquis de Montcalm, which I brought to a successful issue. Thus, for instance, after a march of 60 leagues through forests, which were believed to be impenetrable, sometimes over tracts of country covered with snow, sometimes on the ice of the river Richelieu, I advanced as far as the end of the Lake of Saint Sacrament, where I burned an English flotilla under the very fort which protected it. What, said the Abbe, was it you who did that? Why, I read the account of that event, but I did not know you were the hero. Did you not recognize my name? I knew the name but not the man. How could you expect I should recognize in a member of the Basach, whom I left studying law, and aspiring to become a barrister, a dashing fellow who burns fleets in the faraway depths of Canada? You can surely see that it was impossible. At this moment, the carriage stopped before a posting house. Oh, said the Abbe Ramai, where are we, Anton? We are at Severs, my friend. At Severs, what time is it? Bougainville looked at his watch. It is 10 minutes to 12. Oh, mon Dieu, exclaimed the Abbe, but I shall never be at Boulogne by noon. That is more than probable. A league to go. A league and a half. If only I could find a posting carriage. He rose to his feet in the carriage, and cast a look round him as far as his sight could reach, but there was no sign of even the smallest sort of vehicle. Never mind, he said, I will walk. You shall not walk, said Bougainville. What, you will not let me walk? No, it shall not be said that you caught pleurisy, because you took a drive with a friend. I will go quietly. Oh, I know you. You would be afraid of being scolded by Mademoiselle Marion. You would hurry your pace, arrive in a state of perspiration, drink cold water and give yourself inflammation of the lungs. Some idiot of a doctor would purge you instead of bleeding, or bleed you instead of purging. And 3 days later, goodbye, there would be the end to the Abbe Ramai. All the same, I must return to Boulogne. Hi, postilion, postilion, stop. The carriage, with its fresh horses, set off at a quick trot. Listen, says Bougainville, this is the best thing to do. The best thing to do, my good friend, my dear Antoine, is to stop the horses, so that I can get down and make my way back to Boulogne. No, says Bougainville, the best thing to be done is for you to come with me as far as Versailles. As far as Versailles? Yes, as you have missed Mademoiselle Marion's dinner, you must dine with me at Versailles. Whilst I am receiving final commands from His Majesty, one of these gentlemen will undertake to find a traveling carriage to convey you back to Boulogne. Of course, that would be a great pleasure, my friend, but... But what? The Abbe Ramai felt about in his waistcoat pockets, plunging both hands in up to his armpits. But, he continued, Marion has not put any money in my pockets. Never mind about that, my dear Ramai. At Versailles I will ask the king for 100 crowns for the poor of Boulogne. The king will grant them me, and I will give them to you. You can borrow a few crowns from them until you return in the traveling carriage to Boulogne, and the thing is settled. What, you think the king would give you 100 crowns for my poor? I am sure of it. On your word of honor? On my faith as a gentleman. My friend, that decides me then. Thanks, you would not come for my sake, but you will for your poor. It seems to be better worth being one of your poor parishioners than your friend. I do not say so, my dear Antoine, but you know a curé who deserts his post must have a good excuse. An excuse? Oh, if you slept away, I do not say. What if I slept away? Exclaims the Abbe Ramai, terrified. Do you mean then to make me stop away the night? Postilion, hi, postilion. No, do not be afraid. At the rate we are going, we shall reach Versailles in an hour. We shall dine by 2, and you can leave at 3. Why at 3, and not at 2? Because I must have time to see the king, and ask him for the 100 crowns. Ah, that is true. 3 hours for you to return by carriage from Versailles to Boulogne. You will be home at 6 o'clock. What will Marion say? Bah, when she sees you return with 100 crowns direct from the king, Marion will be happy and proud of your influence. Upon my faith, you are right. You must tell me all the king says to you. This adventure will give her enough to talk of to her neighbors for a week to come. So it is settled, we are to dine at Versailles. Agreed as to Versailles, but now tell me the end of your story. Ah, true, we had got to my expedition on the Saint Sacrament. It earned me the rank of quartermaster of one of the army corps, and the commission to go to Versailles to explain the precarious situation of the governor of Canada, to ask for reinforcements for him. I stayed 2 years and a half in France without obtaining anything that I asked. True, I got what I did not ask for, that is to say, the Cross of St. Louis and the rank of colonel in the staff of the regiment of Rouergue. I arrived in Canada just in time to receive from the Marquis of Montcalm the command of the Grenadiers and Volunteers, at the famous retreat from Quebec, which I was ordered to effect. When Montcalm arrived beneath the walls of the town, he thought he might risk a battle. The 2 generals were killed, Montcalm in our ranks, Wolfe in those of the English. Montcalm dead, our army defeated, there were no means of defending Canada. I returned to France, and went through the campaign of 1761 in England as aide-de-camp to M. de Choiseul-Stainville. Then it was you to whom the king made the present of 2 guns, interrupted the Cure de Boulogne. Who told you that? I read about it, my friend, in the Gazette de la Cour. How could I have dreamt this Bougainville was my friend Antoine? What did you think of the present? Bah, I thought it well deserved. But all the same, I thought the king ought to have given this M. Bougainville, whom I was far from suspecting to be you, something more easily carried about than 2 cannons, for of course, though a great honor, one cannot carry them about wherever one goes. There is truth in what you say, Bougainville resumed, laughing. But as at the same time the king made me captain of a ship, and entrusted me with the founding of a settlement for myself and the inhabitants of St. Malo, in the Isles of Malouines, I thought my 2 cannon might be of use there. Ah, quite right, said the Abbé Ramay. But excuse my ignorance of geography, my dear Antoine, where are the Malouines Isles? I beg your pardon, my friend, said Bougainville. I should have called them the Falkland Isles, for it was I who gave them their name of Malouines Isles in honor of the town of St. Malo. Very good, said the Abbé Ramay, smiling. I recognize them under that name. The Falkland Isles belong to the archipelago of the Atlantic Ocean. I know where they are, near the southern extremity of South America, to the east of Magellan Straits. Upon my word, said Bougainville, Strong, who christened them, could not have determined their bearing more accurately himself. You study geography, then, in your cure of Boulogne. Oh, my friend, when I was young I always longed to be a missionary to the Indies. I was born with the love of travel, and I would have given anything to go round the world. In those days, but not now. Yes, I understand, says Bougainville, exchanging a glance with his 2 companions. Today it would put you out of your regular habits. So you have traveled. My friend, I have never been further than Versailles. Then you have not been to the sea? No. You have never seen a ship? I have seen sails at Auxerre. That is something, but it can only give you a very imperfect idea of a frigate of 60 guns. I should think so, added the Abbé Ramay innocently. So you say you went to the Malouines Isles, where the government had authorized you to found a settlement. I have no doubt that you did so. Unluckily, the Spaniards, after the Peace of Paris, laid claim to these islands. Their claim was considered just by the court of France, which gave them up on condition they indemnified me for the money I had laid out. But did they do so? Yes, my dear friend, they gave me 1,000,000 francs. 1,000,000 francs, peste, what a pretty sum. It will be observed that the good Abbé nearly swore. Now, continued he, where are you going? I am going to Havre. What to do? Forgive me, friend, perhaps I am inquisitive. Inquisitive? Oh, certainly not. I am going to Havre to see a frigate of which the king has made me captain. What is its name? La Boudeuse. Is it a very fine ship? Superb. The Abbé Ramay heaved a sigh. It was evident the poor priest thought what pleasure it would have given him in times past, when he had been free, to have seen the sea and to go over a frigate. This sigh led to a fresh interchange of looks and smiles between Bougainville and the two officers. Both smiles and glances passed unnoticed by the worthy Abbé Ramay, who had fallen into so profound a reverie that he did not return to himself until the carriage stopped before a large hotel. "Ah, so we have arrived," he says. "I am very hungry." "Very well, we will not wait, as the dinner was ordered beforehand." "What a delightful life a sea captain's must be," says the Abbé. "He gets millions from the Spaniards, he travels post in a good carriage, and when he arrives he finds a dinner all ready for him. Poor Marion, she has dined without me." "Bah," says Bougainville, "once does not mean always. We will dine without her, and I hope her absence will not take away your appetite." "Oh, don't be anxious, I am really very hungry." "Well then, to table, to table." "To table," merrily repeated the Abbé Ramay. It was a good dinner. Bougainville was a gourmet, he drank no other wine than champagne. The fashion of icing it had just been invented. All priests, whether they be cures of a small town or hamlet, or officiating priests of a chapel without a congregation, are inclined to be a little greedy. The Abbé Ramay, modest though he was, had the sensual side with which nature has endowed the palate of the ecclesiastic. At first he would not drink more than a few drops of wine in his water. Then he mixed wine and water in equal parts. Then, finally, he decided to drink his wine pure. When Bougainville saw he had arrived at this point, he rose, and announced that it was time for him to present himself before the king, to whom he was going to address the request relative to the poor of Boulogne. In the meantime the two officers were to keep the Abbé Ramay company. As Bougainville had said, he was absent an hour. In spite of the efforts of the officers, the worthy priest's hopes seesawed up and down in a way which did credit to his kindliness of heart. "Well," he said when he caught sight of Bougainville, "what about my poor people?" "It is not 300 livres that the king has given me for them," said Bougainville, drawing a roll from his pocket, "but 50 louis." "What, 50 louis?" exclaimed the Abbé Ramay, quite overcome by this regal bounty. 1,200 livres. 1,200 livres. Impossible. Here they are. The Abbé Ramay held out his hand. "But the king has given them to me on one condition." "What?" "That you drink to his health." "Oh, if that is all." He held out his glass, into which Bougainville tipped the neck of the bottle. "Stop, stop," said the Abbé. "Come now," Bougainville insisted, "half a glass." Well, the king would not be pleased to see only half a glass drunk to his health. "Really," the Abbé Ramay said jovially, 1,200 livres deserve a whole glass. Fill it quite full, Antoine, and here's to the king's health." "To the king," repeated Bougainville. "Ah," said the Abbé Ramay, putting his glass on the table, "that is what one might call a real orgy. True, it is the first I have taken part in, and I shall not have the opportunity of a second for a very long time. I tell you what it is," said Bougainville, resting his elbows on the table. "Well," replied the Abbé Ramay, whose eyes were shining like carbuncles. "Something you ought to do." "What is it?" "You tell me you have never seen the sea." "Never." "Well, you ought to come to Havre with me." "I come to Havre with you, but you are not dreaming of such a thing as that, Anton." "On the contrary, it is just what I am doing. Have a glass of champagne." "Thanks, I have already drunk too much." "Ah, to the health of your poor people. That is a toast you cannot resist." "Yes, but only a drop." "A drop when you drank the glass full to the king. Ah, that is not scriptural, my dear Ramay. Our Saviour said, 'The first shall be last.' A full glass for the poor of Boulogne or none at all." "Here goes, then, for a full glass, but it is the last." The Abbé, good Catholic as he was, emptied his toast to the poor as gaily as that to the king. "There," said Bougainville, "now it is agreed we set off for Havre." "Anton, you must be mad." "You shall see the sea, my friend, and such a sea, not a lake like the poor Mediterranean, but the ocean which rolls round the world." Do not tempt me, you wretched fellow. The ocean, which you yourself admit it has been the desire of your life to see. Vade retro Satanas. It is only a matter of a week. But do you not know, then, that if I absent myself for a week without leave, I shall lose my cure? I have foreseen that, and as Monseigneur, the Bishop of Versailles, was with the king, I made him sign you a permit, telling him you were coming with me. You told him that? Yes. And he signed me a permit. Here it is. Dear me, it is indeed a signature. Good, I would swear to it. My friend, you are a sailor at heart. Give me my 50 louis, and let me go. Here they are, but you shall not go. Why not? Because I am authorized by the king to hand you 50 more at Havre, and you will not be so mean a Christian as to deprive your poor people, your children, the flock over which the Saviour has given you charge, of 50 beautiful golden louis. Very well, cried the Abbé Ramai, then I will go to Havre, but it is only for their sakes I consent. Then, stopping suddenly, no, he said violently, it is impossible. Why impossible? Marianne's. You shall write to her, to relieve her anxiety. What shall I tell her, my friend? Tell her that you have met the Bishop of Versailles, and that he has given you leave to go to Havre. That would be lying. To lie for a good motive is not a sin, but a virtue. She will not believe me. You can show her the permit signed by the bishop. Stay, that is true. Ah, you barristers, you soldiers and sailors, you do not stick at anything. See, you want pen and ink and paper. The Abbé Ramai reflected for a minute, and no doubt he said to himself that a written lie was a bigger sin than a spoken one, for suddenly he said, No, I would rather tell her on my return, but she will think me dead. She will be all the more pleased when she sees you back alive. Then, my friend, do not leave me time to reflect, but carry me off now. Nothing easier. So turning to the two officers. The horses are in, are they not? Yes, Captain. Well then, let us go. En voiture, repeated the Abbé Ramai in the tones of a man who flings himself head-first into some unknown peril. En voiture, repeated the two officers gaily. They got into the carriage, traveled very fast all night, and by 5 next morning they were at Havre. Bougainville himself chose the room to be occupied by his friend, who, tired with the journey and still a little heavy from the previous day's dinner, slept and did not wake till noon. Just as he was waking, Bougainville came into his room and opened the windows. The Abbé uttered a cry of surprise and admiration. The windows looked out on the sea. A quarter of a league away La Boudeuse was riding gracefully in the roadstead, moored with 2 anchors down. Oh, asked the Abbé Ramai, what is that magnificent vessel? My friend, said Bougainville, that is La Boudeuse, where we are expected to dinner. What, do you mean me to go on board? Surely, you would not come all the way to Havre and return without having seen over a ship. Why, my dear friend, it is just as though you went to Rome without seeing the Pope. True enough, said the Abbé Ramai, but when shall we return? When you like, after dinner, it is for you to decide. You shall give your orders and be captain on my vessel. Very good, let us go soon rather than late. We have taken 14 hours to come, but I shall take quite 5 or 6 days to return. What does it matter, as you have leave for a week? I know that quite well, but you see there is Marianne. You are picturing to yourself the cries of joy she will utter when she sees you again. Do you think they will be cries of joy? Zounds, I hope so indeed. I too hope so, said the Abbé in tones expressive of more doubt than hope. Then, like a man who has flung his cap over the windmill, Come, come, he said, to the frigate. Bougainville appeared to be waited on by Genii, who also did the bidding of the Abbé Ramai, and to such good purpose that, when the latter exclaimed to Havre, he found the carriage all ready, and in the same way when he exclaimed to the frigate, he found the captain's gig in waiting. He got into the boat and sat down by Bougainville, who took the helm. A dozen sailors waited with raised oars. Bougainville made a sign. The 12 oars fell and hit the water with so regular a movement that they seemed to strike it as one man. The gig flew over the sea like those long-legged water spiders which glide over water. In less than 10 minutes they were alongside. It hardly need he said that the maritime wonder called a frigate roused the enthusiasm of the good Abbe Ramai to the highest pitch. He asked Bougainville the name of each mast, of each yard, and of each rope. No sails were set, but they were hanging in brails. In the middle of the naming of the different parts of the ship, a messenger came to tell the captain that dinner was served. The Abbe and he went down into the captain's cabin. This cabin might have vied with any drawing-room, belonging to one of the richest chateaux round Paris in comfort and elegance. The Abbe's surprise increased more and more. Fortunately, although it was 15 November, the sea was all ablaze. It was one of those beautiful autumn days, which seem like a farewell sent to the earth by the summer sun before its disappearance for 6 months. The Abbe Ramai was not in the least seasick, upon which fact the superior officers admitted to the captain's table, and the captain himself offered their congratulations. However, towards the middle of dinner it seemed to him as though the motion of the frigate was increasing. Bougainville replied that it was the ebb tide, and delivered a learned lecture on tides. The Abbe Ramai listened to his friend's scientific dissertation with the greatest animation and attention, and, as he was not unacquainted with physical science, he made observations in his turn, which seemed to call forth the delighted admiration of the officers. The dinner was protracted longer than the diners themselves realized. Nothing is so deceptive as to the passing of time as interesting conversation, enlivened with good wine. Then came coffee, that sweet nectar for which the Abbe confessed a weakness. Captain Bougainville's coffee was such a cunning and happy mixture of mocha and Martinique, that when he was imbibing it, in small sips, the Abbe declared he had never tasted its equal. Then, after the coffee, came liqueurs, those famous liqueurs de Madame Anfou which were the delight of the gourmets of the latter part of the last century. Finally, when the liqueurs had been enjoyed, and the Abbe Ramai proposed to go back to the deck, Bougainville raised no opposition to this desire. But he was obliged to give his arm to his friend up the companion, the Abbe naively attributing his instability of balance to the champagne, mocha coffee, and liqueurs de Madame Anfou which he had drunk. The frigate was on the larboard tack, with her head to the northeast, and the wind blowing free. All sail was set, including lower and top-gallant studding sails. Only the staysails were stowed. They must have been going at 11 knots an hour. The good Abbe's first feeling was that of wholehearted admiration for this masterpiece of naval architecture in full sail. Then he noticed that the frigate was moving. Next he looked around him, and finally, he uttered a cry of terror. The land of France looked no more than a cloud upon the horizon. He regarded Bougainville with an expression in which was concentrated all the reproaches of a betrayed confidence. "My dear fellow," said Bougainville, "it gave me so much pleasure to see you, my oldest and dearest comrade, that I resolved we would remain together as long as possible. I wanted a chaplain on board my frigate. I asked His Majesty to let you fill this post, and he graciously granted it, together with a stipend of 1,000 crowns. Here is your commission." The Abbe Ramai flung a frightened glance at his appointment. "But," he said, "where are we going?" "Round the world, my dear man." "How long does it take to go round the world?" "Oh, from 3 to 3 years and a half, more or less, but reckon 3.5 years rather than 3. The Abbe fell back, overcome, against the raised stand of the officer's watch. "Oh," he murmured, "I shall never dare to appear before Marion again." "I promise to take you to the presbytery, and to make your peace with her," said Bougainville. On 15 May 1770, the frigate Boudius re-entered the port of Saint Malo. It was exactly 3 years and a half since she had left Havre. Bougainville was not a day out in his calculation. In that time she had been all round the world. Heaven alone knows what passed at the first interview which took place between the Abbe Ramai and Marion. Chapter 11. Breakfast on deck Saint Nazaire. A thing husbands never think of. Noirmontier's Belle-Isle. I leave the 2 Paulines, the rope ladder, the ship's boat, a total immersion, the inn at Saint Nazaire. I throw money through the window, a batch of clothes, return to Paris. While these maneuvers were being put into execution, I rejoined our young married couple. "Well, monsieur," said the bride to me, "the moment has come for you to return to land and to leave us." "Not yet, madame," I said. She fixed her gaze on me. "Not yet," she repeated. "No, madame, I have obtained permission from the captain not to leave you till the very last minute. I am to lunch with you, and we shall still have several long hours to spend talking of France." "Thank you, monsieur," the husband replied. But now everybody who had come on board, either for business matters or for affairs of the heart, bade their adieus, got down into the boats, and went away from the ship. The anchor was drawn out of the water and catted, and La Pauline began to obey the motion of the outgoing tide and the breeze. Slight as the movement was, it was enough to bring on a fresh paroxysm of grief in the case of the bride. I went back to the captain. "Captain," I said, "I believe you would give very great pleasure to your passengers, to two, at least, among them, if you ordered lunch to be served on deck." "Why so?" "Because over there is a young wife who desires to take in every bit of France she can before she leaves it, which she cannot do if she is on the between-decks." "It would be easy enough," said the captain, "for I only have 5 passengers at my table." "Then you agree?" I agreed. We were now off Saint Nazaire, which rises sadly out of sand and heather, with not even a tree to rest the eye. But the young woman's gaze hugged the bare landscape with as much eagerness as though she were looking upon some Swiss meadow or Scotch loch. "Madame," I said to her, "I have come from the captain to tell you luncheon is ready." "Oh, I cannot eat anything," she replied. "Allow me, madame, to tell you that I am certain of the contrary." She shook her head. "Seeing," I continued, "that we are not going to have luncheon between decks but here on deck." "You asked the captain to do that," she exclaimed, with as much fervor as though I had realized a desire which she had not even dared to let herself dwell upon. "Why, yes, I did," I answered, laughing. "Oh," she said, turning to her husband, "how good monsieur is, dear." "Upon my word," he said, "you should be most grateful to him. I had not even thought of such a thing." How is it that even the most devotedly loving husbands, even those just married, never think of things that strangers do? I leave this reflection to the wisdom of any psychologists who may chance to peruse this book. The table was set on deck. The young woman ate little, but she did not lose sight for an instant of the 2 banks of the Loire, which were now growing wider and wider apart. As we approached the sea, the color of the water changed from yellow to greenish. Then waves began to foam on its surface. When we had doubled Saint Nazaire, we found ourselves in the angle of a kind of gigantic 5, which, at its widest end, displayed to our gaze the limitless horizon of the sea. This was the first time the young woman had seen the sea she was to cross. It was evident that the vision caused her profound terror. The sea was rough without being actually stormy, but it was not its roughness that impressed the melancholy voyager, nor was it the white-crested waves which made her turn pale. It was the idea of its infinity, the feeling of immensity of space that the sight of the ocean always gives. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we reached the open sea. Then, on our left lay the Isle of Noirmoutiers, Nigrum Monasteriuni, which derives its name from a Benedictine monastery, founded there in the 7th century by Saint Philibert, and destroyed in the 9th century by those Normans whose appearance saddened the last years of Charlemagne. On the right lay Belle-Isle, the Isle of Fouquet, which was to give its name later to the heroine of one of my comedies, and later again was to become the scene of action of my triple epic The Musketeers, and to provide a tomb worthy of my poor friend Porthos. At the time of which I am writing, these various names struck my ears indifferently, but they stayed in my memory nonetheless, and were to reappear one day decked in all the framework of the dream fancies of my imagination, floating Isles of Delos, which will stop in more or less advanced positions in the realms of the future. In front of us stretched the sea with its indented crests, merging towards the horizon in a sky dark with clouds, in which the sun was beginning to enshroud itself. We were nearly 3 leagues from harbor, off the reef called Les Pitiers. The bad channels were past, the wind was south-southwest and freshening. The pilot announced that his task was done, that he handed over the command to the captain, and that he should return to land. I must say, I looked at the means of descent from the ship to the skiff with some disquietude. It was nothing more than a rope ladder fixed to the round sides of the ship. And moreover, the ship was making its 7 knots an hour. For a moment I wished I need not get off before reaching Guadeloupe. Fortunately, the captain understood what was going on in my mind, and came to the conclusion that a short delay of 10 minutes was of no account in a voyage of 6 weeks. "Come," he said to me, "go and pay your adieus whilst I lay to the ship." Then he shouted, "Down with the helm." Instantly, the sails quivered. They were doing for me the same as is done when a man falls overboard. "Clew up the mainsail," continued the captain, "and haul in the sails to the mainmast." The ship stopped, or very nearly so. The pilot was already in his boat. I went up to the poor exile. Tears were silently streaming down her cheeks. "You will be sure and fulfill my commission, will you not, monsieur?" she said in a broken voice. I bowed my acquiescence. "You will embrace my mother for me." "I promise you I will do so, madame." "But," said the husband, "if you want monsieur to kiss your mother for you, you ought first to give him the kiss." "Oh yes, certainly," exclaimed the young wife effusively, "with all my heart," and she flung her arms round my neck. Here was an unusual situation. That woman and I had never seen one another till the night before, and in the morning we were still strangers to one another. At starting, we were merely acquaintances. By luncheon, we had developed into friends. Parting made us seem like brother and sister. Oh, mysteries of the heart, misunderstood by the crowd at large, but which turn those to whom God has revealed his secrets into beings destined for suffering. I had greater difficulty in leaving these friends of a day than it would have given me pleasure to see friends of 20 years standing. "You will not forget my name, will you, monsieur?" the young wife said. "Try and read the next books that I shall write, madame, and I promise you shall find that name in one of my very first novels." There was also, perhaps, underlying the attraction for the ship, my anxiety at the prospect of the more or less perilous descent to which I was about to subject myself. Luckily, I had plenty of spectators to witness my gymnastic maneuvers, and you know how the feeling of being looked at redoubles one's courage. So I went bravely forward towards the ship's side. I caught hold of the main shrouds as well as the ladder, which the pilot, afraid perhaps of my falling into the sea before I had paid him his crown, had, to make my descent easier, held taut with one hand, while with his other, by help of a rope fastened through a porthole, he kept the skiff within reach of the ship. I had not descended 2 rungs of the ladder before the wind blew my hat off. I did not even try to catch it, for I more than needed both hands to clutch fast hold of the ladder. At last, to my great satisfaction, and without displaying too much clumsiness, I reached the bottom of the skiff. That was one of the happiest moments of my life. I was scarcely seated on one of the seats in the boat before the pilot let go both ladder and rope, and we were 30 feet away from La Pauline. I could soon hear the captain's voice shouting, "Let go the main sails." And instantly the sails stopped quivering and the ship resumed her course. Our 2 young people stood astern, he waving his hat and she her handkerchief. Meanwhile, the pilot was trimming a little sail. I noticed that it was set by the skiff suddenly heeling over, so if I had not held on to the opposite side of the boat, I should have been spilled right into the sea. The joke soon began to appear rather less funny to me, all the more so since the pilot, who could hardly speak any French, and who was chary of using what words he did know of our language, kept staring at the horizon with a fixedness that troubled me. The fact was that the nearer we approached the coast, the rougher grew the sea. Night, too, was rapidly coming on. I could still see the three-master, because its pyramids of sails stood out against the purple horizon of the setting sun. But it was evident that they could no longer see us, or that, if they did see us, we must have looked like a gull hidden among the waves. Those who have ever found themselves in a frail boat over a watery abyss, with a moving wall to right and left, immensity of sea before and behind, and a stormy sky over their heads, alone know what the wind has told them, as it drives through their hair soaked with foam. In half an hour's time, the pilot was compelled to lower his sail. He took to the oars, but they did not grip the waves properly. Here and there we saw high white waves fling their broken crests up into the air, which the wind carried to us in fine, ice-cold rain. These were the places where the waves broke against the rocks. Luckily the flow was carrying us landwards, but at the same time that the flowing tide served us, the wind blew us past the mouth of the Loire and drove us along the coast of Croisic. I myself had no notion where we were. Night came on faster and faster, and the circle of darkness contracted more and more, until we only had about 20 paces of horizon. I made up my mind to hold on tight to the bottom of the boat, and to trouble about nothing else except preventing myself being pitched into the sea. But seated at the bottom as I was half soaked in the water we had shipped when we were sailing. 2 hours went by in this fashion, and I must say they seemed the longest hours I ever lived. Once, when I rose to look about me, I saw the pilot make a quick movement, and next instant the bark bounded up as though it were gone crazy. We passed under a sort of cataract which came from the dark crest of a rock. I thought all was over that time. The water ran down the collar of my shirt and streamed right through to my gaiters. I shut my eyes and waited, At the end of 5 minutes, as I still felt I was in the boat, I opened them again. We were neither better nor worse off than before, and nothing had changed except that we could now hear the noise of the surf against the shore. We were evidently not farther off than the length of a couple of cables. The pilot held on to the helm, and driven by the flowing tide, left all the work to the sea, his sole task, and no easy one it seemed to me, being to steer us through the rocks. Suddenly he got up and shouted to me, "Hold on tight." The advice was more than useless. I was holding on to the seat tightly enough to have left my fingerprints on it. I felt a violent shock, as if the bottom of the boat had raked a bed of shingle. The pilot passed rapidly across me and jumped into the sea. I did not in the least understand this evolution, but on getting up, I caught sight of him standing up to his chest in the water, dragging the boat towards him by a rope. 15 paces from us was the cliff. I had a great mind to jump down beside my man, but he realized my intention and sang out, "No, no, stay still, we are just in." Indeed, the first wave pushed the boat so near to the strand that it ran aground. "Now," said the pilot, coming towards me, "get onto my back." "What for?" "To prevent your getting wet." The precaution was good, but came a little too late in the day, seeing I was already soaked through like a sponge. "Thanks for your thoughtfulness," I said, "but you need not take the trouble," and I leapt into the sea. At that moment came a wave which went right over my head. "Capital," I said, "now my bath is complete. Oh, what a confounded idiot I am to take such trips as this when there is no occasion to do so at all. Oh." The last exclamation was wrung from me by the satisfaction I felt at being once more on terra firma. We had landed in the little creek that lies between Saint-Nazaire and Le Croisic, a league and a half nearly from either of these two towns. So I had my choice, but Le Croisic was a league and a half out of my way, while Saint-Nazaire, on the other hand, was just so much nearer. There was no need for hesitation, and I decided immediately upon Saint-Nazaire. As to the pilot, he remained with his skiff. The wind was whistling as harshly as upon the Elsinore stage, just when the ghost of the King of Denmark is to appear. I had only one way of warming myself, which was to keep moving as hard as I could. I held out 5 francs to the pilot, instead of 3 as I had promised him, and with bare head, my hands tucked into my pockets, with not a rag on me dry, soaked with that delightful sea water which never does dry, I set off at a quick trot to follow the coastline. I reached Saint-Nazaire an hour later, and knocked at the door of the only inn of the place, which made all kinds of difficulties in the way of opening its doors and receiving, at 11 o'clock at night, a man without a hat. The dialogue that took place with a view to my gaining an entrance being prolonged endlessly, and not promising to end to my satisfaction, I conceived the idea of throwing a 5-franc piece through the window on the first story, out of which the landlord was leaning to talk to me. The host would then be certain of payment for my bed. The coin rang on the wooden floor of the room, and the innkeeper picked it up, lit a lamp, and making sure that my money was good metal, decided to let me in. 10 minutes later, I stood quite naked in front of an immense fire of heather, which roasted me without warming me thoroughly. But I was so delighted to feel the earth under my feet that I forgot all about the extreme cold I had suffered, and paid no attention to the other extreme of heat. The host had now grown as amiable as at first he had been crusty. He offered me a shirt of his own, which I accepted, warmed my bed himself, and carried my clothes away to be baked in the oven. He had been baking bread and flat cakes that day, and the oven was still warm. My cast-off garments were put in it on an iron oven plate, and thanks to this idea, I found my clothes were as dry next day as tinder. At 11 o'clock I was back at Paimboeuf, by night I was at Nantes, and the next day I reached Tours, where I duly delivered to Madame 1000, her daughter's messages. The same day, I found a disengaged place in the mail coach and engaged it. I was sick of the Carlist language that I had heard for 6 weeks, and wanted to see my July sunshine once more and my revolutionary Paris, and my buildings all riddled with shot. When I arrived, it was pouring in torrents. M. Guizot had become Prime Minister, and they were scraping the front of the Institut. Book 5. Chapter 1. Confidential letter from Louis-Philippe to the Emperor Nicholas. The Tsar's reply. What France could do after the Revolution of July. Louis-Philippe and Ferdinand Roman 7. The Spanish refugees. Reaction in the Home Department. Scraping of the public monuments. Protest. The last sentence in my previous chapter virtually shows how far the reaction in Paris had progressed at the moment I returned there after my absence of 6 weeks or 2 months. The conversation between the lieutenant general and the Republicans on the night of 3 July will be recollected, and how Louis-Philippe had then revealed his system of just milieu, a system which had been so repugnant to our young men that Cavaignac had exclaimed, "Oh, if that is how things are going to be, monsieur, we need have no anxiety, for you will not hold out for 4 years." Cavaignac was not mistaken in his prophecy, although he was wrong as to the date, merely a chronological error after all. Moreover, a letter, made public by the very man to whom it had been addressed, a prince, whose aristocratic and hereditary pride took pleasure in humbling a king sprung from a revolution, had published, far more clearly than the light words of a conversation, the program of the new reign. Copies of this letter actually sent from St. Petersburg were in circulation. It was from the King of France to Monsieur, his brother, the Emperor of all the Russias. M. Athelin had brought it by special courier, but it was to be delivered separately from the official letter which announced the lieutenant general's accession to the throne. This was the letter intended only to be read by the Emperor of Russia, but was naturally the only one of the two that was read by the whole world. It seemed inexplicable to men who for the last 15 years had followed the policy adopted by the Duc d'Orléans towards the elder branch, to those who were acquainted with his conduct towards Charles X and the young Duke of Bordeaux, during the days which preceded his nomination to the lieutenant generalship, and those which followed, also to those who knew the part the Palais Royal had played in that great mise-en scene of the expedition to Rambouillet, which had ended not exactly in the flight. Charles X maintained his dignity safe and sound as far as Cherbourg, but in the departure of the royal family. The staunchest of King Louis-Philippe's friends denied that the letter was written by him. They said it was apocryphal altogether. As I ought to explain the charges I have brought against the government of King Louis-Philippe, in my capacity both as an ordinary citizen and also as a man of letters, for the benefit of friends past and present, who were surprised at it, I may perhaps be permitted to continue to enumerate my reasons for my political repugnance, which led to my sending in my resignation to the king, at a time when my interest, if self-interest had been allowed to triumph over my conscientious scruples, should have rather incited me to make up to the princely fortunes when they advanced to the estate of kingship. I have mentioned the impression made on me by the letter from the Duc d'Orléans to King Charles X, that had been carried by M. de Mortemart. I have told how the handshaking, the singings of the Marseillaise and the forehead bathed in perspiration, had driven me out of the Palais Royal at the very moment when the young Duc de Chartres was making his entry into it. I have also described the shame that had glued me motionless before the placard, wherein the Duc d'Orléans laid claim to being a Valois, ignoring the most elementary historical facts, and renouncing Saint Louis for an ancestor, claimed François I, as head of his house, of all our kings the most debauched, impolitic and faithless to his word. Furthermore, the 3 sons of the king, the Duc d'Orléans, the Duc d'Aumale and the Duc de Montpensier, well knew that my defection was honorable and disinterested, that I never boasted, by calling them my friends, although they more than once did me the honor to call themselves mine. It will be seen when I shall have occasion to speak of them, and it will happen frequently in the course of these memoirs, how faithful I am to them in their misfortunes, and that the memories which flow from my heart and pen, as we follow the exiles in their retirement, are reverently given. But to return to the king's letter to the Emperor Nicholas, it may sound absurd to say it, but it was a real grief to me, just as the Tsar's reply caused me feelings of shame. I think that if a country is to be truly great and generous and strong, each individual citizen belonging to it ought to be in a measure a nerve in the general organization, and feel individually any impulses given to it as a nation, or to its glory or honor. Here is the letter. Long though it be, we will follow it with the reply, our only commentary being to italicize certain passages. Monsieur mon frère, I have to announce to your Majesty my accession to the throne, by a letter that General Athelin will present you, in my name, but I wish to speak to you with complete confidence in regard to the sequel to the catastrophe that I would so gladly have averted. For some long time past, I have had to deplore that King Charles X and his government did not follow a policy better calculated to fulfill the expectations and the wishes of the nation. I could not in the least foresee the momentous issues that have come to pass, and I even thought that, but for want of being able to obtain a frank and loyal spirit in the tone of the Charter and of our institutions, it would only have needed a little more prudence and moderation to enable the government to have gone on, as it was for a long time to come. But, since 8 August 1829, the composition of the new ministry had alarmed me greatly. I could see how far its attitude was disliked and suspected by the nation, and I shared in the general feelings of disquiet as to what measures we might expect from it. Nevertheless, fidelity to law and love of order have made such progress in France that resistance to the government would certainly not have expressed itself in such extreme forms had not the government itself, in its madness, given the fatal signal by its audacious violation of the Charter and by its abolition of all the guarantees of our national liberty, in defense of which there is scarcely one single Frenchman who would not be willing to shed his blood. No excesses have followed that terrible struggle. But it was difficult to prevent some shaking in our social condition, and that very exaltation of spirit, which deterred the people from excessive disorder, carried them at the same time towards experiments in political theories, which might have precipitated France, and perhaps even Europe, into terrible calamities. It was under this state of things, sire, that all eyes turned on me. The very vanquished party itself felt me to be necessary to its salvation. I was the more necessary, probably, in order to prevent the conquerors from taking immoderate advantage of their victory. I have, therefore, accepted this noble and painful task, and I have waved aside all personal considerations which arose, urging me to refuse the crown, because I felt that the least hesitation on my part might compromise the future of France and the peace of all our neighbors. The title of Lieutenant General, which left everything unsettled, excited dangerous mistrust, and it was imperative to hasten to get rid of the provisional state, as much to inspire necessary confidence as to save the Charter. It was essential to preserve this, the importance of which our august brother the late Emperor realized thoroughly, and it would have been sorely compromised if people's minds had not been promptly satisfied and reassured. It will not escape your Majesty's perspicacity and great wisdom that, in order to attain this salutary end, it is most desirable that affairs in Paris should be seen in their true light, and that Europe, doing justice to the motives that have guided my actions, should uphold my government with that confidence to which it has the right to look forward. May your Majesty not lose sight of the fact that, so long as King Charles X reigned over France, I was one of the most submissive and faithful of his subjects, and that it was only when I saw the action of the laws paralyzed, and the exercise of royal authority totally annihilated, that I felt it my duty to defer to the national vote by accepting the crown which was offered me. It is to you, sire, that France is looking. She loves to think of Russia as her most natural and powerful ally. The guarantee of such an alliance lies in the noble character and the many qualifications for which your Imperial Majesty is noted. I beg you to accept the assurance of my great esteem and of the unalterable friendship with which I remain your Imperial Majesty's affectionate brother, Louis Philippe. A letter so full of tender protestations, so humble and obsequious as this, deserved, indeed, a polite reply. Here is that sent by His Majesty of all the Russias. I have received from the hands of General Athelin the letter of which he was the bearer. Events, ever to be deplored, have placed your Majesty in a position of cruel alternative, and you have adopted a determination which seemed to you the only means left of saving France from the greatest calamities. I will not pronounce judgment upon the considerations that have directed your Majesty, but I will pray to Providence to bless your intentions and the efforts you are about to make for the welfare of the French people. In concert with my allies, I accept with pleasure your Majesty's expressed desire that peace and friendship should be maintained between you and all the European states. So long as these relations are based upon existing treaties, and with a firm resolution to respect the rights and obligations and the conditions of territorial possession which those treaties have ratified, Europe will find in them a guarantee of peace very necessary to the tranquility of France herself. Called upon in conjunction with my allies to cultivate these conservative relations with France under her present government, I, on my part, will give them all the careful consideration they demand, and am pleased to offer your Majesty the assurance of my good disposition, in return for the sentiments you have expressed towards me. I beg you at the same time to accept the expression of my kind feelings towards you. Nicholas! That was all Louis Philippe got in return for his fraternal outpourings. Nicholas might just tolerate his position if he respected the treaties of 1815, and he offered him his dispositions in exchange for the sentiments he had put forth in his letter. Now here was exactly where his new situation proved embarrassing. We have spoken of the July Revolution as being the last flash of Waterloo. And indeed, as soon as the revolution was an accomplished fact, every generous-hearted mind in France turned its thoughts towards Belgium and Italy and Poland. Belgium in those days was still, it will be remembered, a part of Holland, as annexed territory. Italy was then, as it is still, groaning under the tyranny of Austria. Poland was divided up between Prussia, Russia, and Austria, and had not even the consolation left it of gathering its scattered members together in the same shroud. Now, kind-hearted people were asking for a remodeling of Europe. They wanted to give to the flocks which are called nations pastors chosen by themselves. They refused to recognize those butchers, with whom the heartless diplomatists, who sat at the green-covered table at the Vienna Congress, had divided 100 million bodies and souls almost at haphazard. But this was just what Louis-Philippe did not want. He represented the bourgeoisie, which was made up of lawyers, men of business, bankers, money brokers, and financiers, and the bourgeoisie has its own god all to itself, which has no sympathies in common with the god worshipped by great minds and noble hearts. The situation was so lofty that the blinking eyes of that bourgeoisie lowered, utterly dazzled, before they could raise themselves to such a height. For, indeed, after the Revolution of 1830, France could fling at kings the defiance of an unbounded ambition. It could not only act on its own individual strength, but also, by allying other peoples with it, it could increase its power and neutralize that of kings. What was necessary for this? It is enough to look at the general condition of the European monarchies, at Russia, with its vulture of the Caucasus and its gangrene in Constantinople, to Austria, with its twofold cancer of Italy and Hungary, to Holland, with its hostile Belgium, to England, with its unsubdued Scotland and its starving Ireland, to see that if we did but raise our voices a little louder, we should not merely be masters at home, but could extend our supremacy over the whole of Europe. At one time, it seemed as though France was going to adopt this wide and splendid policy towards Spain. It is true, though, that the motive which moved Louis-Philippe in his action with regard to Spain was an entirely personal feeling, as stupid, almost as despicable as his grandfather, Ferdinand of Naples, who would not recognize the French Republic in his day. Ferdinand of Spain did not wish to recognize the Revolution of July. Or, at any rate, he wished to ignore the prince who had just inherited the throne after that revolution, in almost as mysterious a fashion as he himself had succeeded the last of the Khans. So, on the first impulse of anger, King Louis-Philippe received a deputation of 3 of the members of the Spanish Committee, Loewe-Weimers, Marchais, and Dupont, introduced by M. Odelin Barrett. He treated his brother Ferdinand in scurvy fashion and all but offered a rope with which he hoped to see him hanged. He went even farther and placed 100,000 francs at the disposal of Lafayette to support the enterprises of the Spanish revolutionists. From this side, at all events, they believed themselves safe from political reaction. M. Giraud of Elaine, prefect of police, openly distributed passports to the Spanish refugees who were on their way to the Pyrenees. The imperials of every public conveyance were reserved for these exiles, who returned to their homes in the face of all the world. And all along the road, besides these specially privileged travelers, bands of 50, 100 and 150 men were to be met with beating drums and flying banners, marching towards Bidasoa. Finally, M. Guizot, a native of Ghent, in other words a reactionary, declared quite openly that, when in 1823 France won back Spain to its absolutist ideas, she committed a political crime. She therefore owes Spain reparation. Such reparation should be given, signal and complete. M. Guizot said these words to M. Louis Viardot and asked him to publish them broadcast. It will be seen that we do not grope in the dark, that we are not making accusations recklessly. We quote not only the words that were said, not only the men who said them, but also the men to whom they were said. Thereupon all those victims of Ferdinand Roman VII, such as Mendizábal, Istúriz, Calatrava, the Duke of Rivas, Martínez de la Rosa, the Count of Torno, General Mina, Colonel Morno, Colonel Valdez, General Torrijos, General Chapelingara, General Lopes Bonos, and General Buttron all raised their hands to heaven and cried Hosanna. Arms were sent so publicly by M. Guizot and de Montalivet that the Spanish ambassador, M. d'Ophelia, took note of the fact diplomatically. Now, we have remarked that Ferdinand Roman VII of Spain was as stupid and almost as cowardly as his grandfather Ferdinand Roman IV. Of Naples, we should really have said that he was more cowardly, for at the mere sound of arms in France, at the mere cries of liberty which were echoed in the South, at the mere roll of drums approaching the frontier, he made the amende honorable and received Louis Philippe with every expression of regret at having held back so long. And although the new king had, as we have said, almost offered the rope wherewith to hang him, he really preferred the sinner's repentance to his death. Without saying anything to them, he withdrew the hand he had held out to the Spanish refugees and left to themselves, or rather delivered over to the vengeance of Ferdinand. They were killed, some on the battlefield, and others, sad and painful and shameful as it is to tell, were chased as far as the frontier and taken and shot down on French territory. Oh, sire, sire, was it not the shades of these martyrs which appeared to you on 24 February, frightening you into the inert and fugitive king, who fell down on the Place de la Révolution, at the foot of the obelisk, on the very spot where the head of King Louis Roman XVI had fallen? And Italy, stirred up by promises given her by Lafayette, promises which the old general thought he could keep. Italy, who, in order to carry out her revolution, only asked for an army corps to be stationed on the Alps, looked in vain towards the west, for the route taken by Hannibal and Charlemagne and Napoleon remained unoccupied. As for Poland, we know M. Sebastiani's famous saying, "Order reigns at Warsaw." In domestic legislation, reaction was just as obvious. First, they had chosen M. Talleyrand as ambassador to London, that political Mephistopheles, who had watched the Republic, the Directory, the Empire, and the Restoration perish in his hands beneath his skeleton smile. The abolition of the penalty of death had miscarried in the chamber. Lastly, orders had been given to efface the bullet marks of July from the front of all public buildings. Certainly, this latter ordinance did not pass without raising opposition. Upon my return to Paris, the walls were still pasted with a protest, which I may be permitted to quote, as the tone of the times is clearly shown in the few lines of which it is composed. And further, because the chief merit of these memoirs should be the preserving intact and reproduction of the character of the times in which I lived, for the benefit of the future, which is always inclined to become hazy. This is it. Reverence for monuments. Each glorious epoch of our history has its own special trophies and monuments. The hero has his bronze statue and his arcs de triomphe. But what living witness will there be to teach the races to come the doings of that cycle of the 3 days, and its immortal people? What pages of history will tell future ages at what a cost the monarchical system of 1,000 years, ancient in despotism, was destroyed? What monument will teach our posterity that there, behind these mutilated columns, their fathers fell in defense of liberty? Is our charter, patched up in a day, a fitting monument to the sovereignty of the people? We have nothing to show but our tombs and the traces of the bullets on our walls, and the marks made by grapeshot which adorn the pediments of our palaces. Those are our bas-reliefs and inscriptions, our celebrations of that great week. In them the people read their triumph, and the king sees there the lessons he ought to learn. On those blackened walls, the temples of science and of art, the bullets of Charles X, have written in ineffaceable characters the love and gratitude and impartiality we might have looked for in a Bourbon. There, if the imprint had been religiously preserved, we might perhaps have discovered the traces of the balls of yet another Charles. What vandal hand, then, has dared to attack these noble relics? Some sacrilegious order, given by I know not what authority, would efface those sublime breaches. If they disappear, it will soon be forgotten that thousands of victims fell for a principle, and that their blood flowed for an ephemeral liberty which only shone upon us for 3 days. Are they friends? Can they be brothers who dare thus to insult our deeds? The Austrians, Russians, and Prussians paid respect to our column, our arcs de triomphe, and shall the shameful insignias of the conqueror of the Trocadero still soil the arc de triomphe of the conqueror of Austerlitz? Courage, men of the morrow! Courage! Continue your heroic work. Tear down those wooden crosses, those tricolor flags that adorn the tombs of our brothers, and then you will have succeeded in effacing every last trace of our revolution. Assigned. Lanne, student of the École Polytechnique. Plock, advocate. Th. Massot, advocate. Guillaume, medical student. Etienne Arago. Ch. Lathon, student of the École Polytechnique. You see, these poor July fighters did not make any great demands. They, who had seen the Republic snatched from them, who had been enclosed in the treaties of 1815, to whom a king had been given, the son of a regicide who had renounced the Convention, only asked that the bullet marks of the Swiss and royal guards imprinted on the facades of their public monuments should be allowed to remain intact. Their demand, as in reason bound, was judged exorbitant and refused accordingly. Thus, just as I said before, when I returned to Paris, M. Guizot was minister, and they were scraping the Institut. Chapter 2. The drama of Saint Leu, the bravery of the Duc d'Aumale, the arrest of M. Peyronnet, Chanteloz, Gernon Ranval and Polignac, Madame de Saint Fargeau's servant, Thomas and M. de Polignac, the ex-ministers at Vincennes, the abolition of the death penalty in the chamber Lafayette M. de Carotry, Salvert death to the ministers, Vive Odelin Barrett and Petion. But before returning to these patchings up of damaged walls, which played an important part, as we shall see in due season, let us finish with the dark tragedy of Saint Leu, and with the last of the cons, who was found one morning hanging, like an old rusty sword, from the catch of a window. I say let us finish with the dark tragedy of Saint Leu, because, in the preceding chapter, I believe I alluded to the mysterious death of the Prince of Condé. Now that death was certainly very mysterious, but my reader must not interpret this epithet in any other sense than the one I give to it. One of my most intimate friends, the same who, on the morning of 17 August 1847, on coming out of the sleeping chamber of Madame la Duchesse de Praslin, had breakfasted with me, after washing his hands a second time from the bloodstains of that unfortunate woman, and who that morning had said to me, "I swear to you that the Duc de Praslin killed his wife." This friend, the celebrated Surgeon Pasquier, as skilled as Dupuytren and as honest as Larry, repeated many times to me the following sentence: "I took the body of the Prince of Condé down from the window. Well, on my soul and conscience, I declare he hanged himself there." I questioned him the more insistently upon this subject, because I had known the poor prince at Villers-Cotterets. I had dined at the same table with him at M. de Villain's, and he had been kind to me, when I was quite a boy, and a stranger and totally unknown to him. Well, upon my word of honor, I too, in my turn, believe implicitly what Pasquier told me many times, which he repeated again exactly in the same terms when, less than a couple of years ago, we both crossed the Channel together to pay our last respects to the dead king at Clermont, a respectful duty, which, from some unknown family susceptibility or other, I regret I was unable to pay personally. I believe that, if the king had not also died before his time, as many of my friends have died, as the one to whom these memoirs are dedicated has died, I would invoke his testimony, which would be devoid of all affection towards that royal family of which he often had reason to complain to others, including myself. His testimony, I say, would not fail me, and I believe it is right to say and write and print this, and to swear to it by the dead man, as I should have done were he alive, when the rumor reached me in the retreat I had voluntarily chosen in a foreign land, that they were going to raise a doubt as to the question of its being suicide. However, it matters little. Had Madame de Futures been accused and convicted of the crime of which science and the law have declared her innocent, had Madame de Futures confessed this crime, had Madame de Futures been condemned to expiate it on the scaffold, had Madame de Futures, in a last confession, accused of moral or material complicity those whom vile hatred has tried to stain with this complicity, had Madame de Futures uttered this monstrous lie, had she published this dastardly slander, even then, for all noble minds, for all honest hearts, no shadow of suspicion could ever have attached to those whom she tried to reach. Cursed be the parties which make use of such weapons for attacking their enemies. As in the case of the Dauphin, when he tried to snatch the sword from the Duc de Ragusa, they only wound and stained their own hands with blood. The author who writes history is bound to tell the truth, and I believe I have ever done so. It is cowardly for such as wield the pen, and write for the public, not to contradict calumnious statements. I therefore emphatically deny this one. It would certainly have been finer and nobler of the Duc d'Orléans, who was already rich in his own rights as a prince, and also drawing wealth, as king, from the civil list. It would have been a grand act, I repeat, if the Duke had renounced the fatal succession, and handed over the vast legacy to a benevolent institution, a foundation in the cause of art, in aid of a national misfortune at that time or in the future. But those who have read these memoirs know how miserly the king was, and if they may have blamed me for publishing the fact, they will understand what I now wish people to infer. Well then, the prince's character being realized, and his temperament admitted, we declare that it would have been altogether beyond the power of the man who could cover 6 pages with figures to discover a bonus of 66 centimes, to renounce a legacy of 66 millions, at the moment when that long-wished-for and expected inheritance came, as it were, of its own accord into his hands. But now let us pass quickly from this subject. As we said at the beginning of this chapter, it was our intention to do, and let us be particularly careful not to fix the responsibility for this fortune, which was left him, on the young and noble hero of La Smala. Alas, so many calumnies, so much indifference and forgetfulness follow exiles that it is, indeed, necessary that some voices should, from time to time, recall to the country that produced them the names of those beloved sons who were worthy of her love. An officer who had received his first epaulets from the Duc d'Aumale once replied to me, when I was praising the bravery of the poor exiled duke in his presence. Brave, why he was no braver than anybody else. No braver than anybody else. As to this, I heard Yusuf, whose own courage I hope nobody will dare to dispute, tell what I am sure he will be ready to repeat. When we found ourselves with only our 250 men face to face with the 40,000 souls that composed La Smala, I asked the prince, Monseigneur, what are we to do? He replied, go in, by Jove. When he said it I thought I must have misunderstood him, so I repeated my question, and when he again said, go in, I tell you, I began to shudder. I took up my sword, of course, because I was a soldier, but I said to myself, then that will be the last of us, for we shall all be lost. No braver than anybody else. Though Cheras, whom nobody ever accused of Orleanist leanings or of knowing fear, being one of those rare natures who love danger for its own sake, unsoldat de nuit, as connoisseurs term them, Cheras himself said to me, in speaking of that same taking of La Smala, to go as the Duc d'Aumale did, with 250 men, into the midst of such a population as that, one must either be but 22 years of age with no knowledge of the meaning of danger, or else have the very devil inside one. The women had only to stretch the tent ropes in front of the horses, in order to throw them down, and to throw their slippers at the soldiers' heads, to exterminate them ally from the first to the last. No, indeed, the Duc d'Aumale's courage was of a different order from the rest of the world's. He was braver even than the bravest of men. In due course, I will relate what he himself told me about it at this period, the first time I saw him after his return. Now let us return to the replastering of the walls, from which we have been turned aside by this digression on the death of the Prince de Condé and the bravery of the Duc d'Aumale. I write, I repeat, as I feel, and above all from conviction, and I proclaim with an equally impartial voice the avarice and scheming of the father and the courage and loyalty of his children. Moreover, the discussion which arose as to whether the walls of Paris should remain in their mutilated condition or not, whether they should bear the immutable impression of the dates of 27, 28 and July, or whether those dates should be effaced from the stones, as it was hoped they would be effaced from people's hearts. This discussion, we say, had a far more significant meaning than the scrapers of houses and restorers of buildings were ready to acknowledge. It was really a question of the saving of the heads of the ex-king's ministers, which were violently imperiled by this public prosecution. 4 of them had been arrested. These were, in the order of their arrest, de Peyronnet, de Guernes-en-Ranville, de Chanteloz, and de Polignac. Let us give a few details concerning these different arrests. The papers of their day duly register the facts, and they are talked of, discussed at the time, and then gradually forgotten. Only the cruel, stupid fact remains. Then history steps in, which limits itself to stating the mere fact, robbed of all its details and of its picturesque side. What does it matter to history? Does it not represent the one bare bones of events, and nothing more? Well, we much prefer a living being to a mummy, and a mummy to a skeleton. Consequently, we will always try to write living history, and it shall not be our fault if it appears in the dry-as-dust form of mummy or skeleton. M. de Peyronnet was the first to be arrested at Tours. On Monday, 6 August, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a postchaise, passing through that town, having awakened suspicions, was surrounded by the National Guard. There was but a single person in the chaise, who affected to speak no language but German. He first of all represented himself to be a courier from the house of Rothschild, and refused to answer the questions put to him, pretending he did not understand them. But when his postilions were questioned, they declared that a second traveler had got out of the carriage a kilometer's distance, before they reached the first houses probably, with the intention of going round outside the town. 2 of the National Guardsmen were at once sent off in the direction of the Bordeaux road, and they soon caught sight of a man walking with long strides over the rising ground by Grammont. A gamekeeper, who had just passed the man, was signaled to by the guardsman and accordingly arrested him. Ordered to say who he was, the stranger showed a passport giving the name of Cambon, but they searched him and the letter P embroidered on his handkerchief and snuff box awoke doubts on the subject of his identity. Two other persons coming up, one of whom gazed attentively at the stranger, declared that he recognized him to be M. de Perronnet. The ex-minister was unlucky. The new arrival, who had recognized him, happened to be an ex-magistrate whom he had deprived of his post. The other, without knowing him personally, had had dealings with him connected with a young man of Tours, called Sir Jean, who had been sentenced for a political offense. He had asked M. de Perronnet to pardon the young man, or, at all events, to lessen his punishment, and he only received a brutal refusal in return. So both these people had a particular hatred towards M. de Perronnet, and, seizing him by his coat collar, they took him into the town. Taken to the prison at Tours, without the insults and ill treatment he had been subjected to, in the least affecting the calm expression of his countenance, M. de Perronnet had been put into the cells. Another arrest was made at Tours that same day, that of de Chanteloz and Gurnon-Ranville. The day previously they had presented themselves at the top of the embankment of Barthélemy, but learning that carriages and travelers were being searched, they withdrew. The following morning, peasants came across two men in the country who seemed to have lost their bearings, and arrested them, taking them to a little village called La Membrel and handing them over to the police, who took both of them bound to Tours. It was not until after some time of hunting that they found the Prince de Polignac. It was believed he must have crossed the frontier, when it was discovered, from a telegraphic dispatch on 18 August, that he had just been arrested at Granville. This was how the arrest was made. He was traveling with the Marquise de Saint-Fargeau, passing for her servant, and was clad in livery. When they reached the neighborhood of Granville, he put himself under the protection of a gentleman named M. Burblanc de Préville, who hid him in a seaport inn. In spite of his disguise, perhaps even because of it, suspicions were aroused and were increased by the fact of his landing in the night. When he was the least expecting to be recognized, two of the National Guards suddenly entered his room. The prince turned away when he saw them and hid his face in his hands. "Have you your papers?" they asked. "By what authority do you put such a question to me?" the prince responded. "Have you your papers?" the men asked a second time and more imperatively. "No." "Well, in that case, you must come with us to prison." At that moment, Madame de Saint-Fargeau, who had been warned of what was happening, entered the room, laid claim to her servant, and protested against the rude treatment to which they were subjecting him. But M. de Polignac was arrested in spite of the Marquise's protests, bound and taken to prison in the town. Next day, he confessed to the mayor that he was the Prince de Polignac. He was taken under an escort of the National Guard, that same day away from Granville. His journey through Coutances and his arrival at Saint-Lô were very nearly fatal to him. The population threatened to tear him in pieces, and for a brief period, it seemed as though the efforts of his guards, who tried to defend him, would prove useless. Arms were stretched over the guard of soldiers and policemen, endeavoring to hook him out from their ranks. One man even managed to get a pistol put to his throat and would probably have fired if, by good fortune, someone had not held up his arm. The prince was very pale, but whether from fatigue or terror could not be told. From Saint-Lô, M. de Polignac had written to the Minister of the Interior to protest against his arrest and to plead his rank as a peer of France, which allowed him the privilege of not being arrested except by an order from the Chamber of Peers itself. By a strange chance, I happen to be able to give details of M. de Polignac's journey that no one else received, and probably I, and the principal actors, are the only persons now who recollect them. The prince was placed in the care of Thomas. When I say Thomas, my readers will know quite well to whom I refer. He was that brave and loyal friend of Bastide who, like Bastide, risked his life and sacrificed his fortune for the cause of liberty. He had promised to take the prince safe and sound to Paris, at the price of his own life if need be. From that moment, the prince could rest easy, for he knew he would either reach his destination safely with his conductor or neither of them would do so. The carriage which took the ex-minister of France to Paris started in the dark, but although Thomas had undertaken to conduct M. de Polignac safe and sound to Paris, he had no intention whatever of letting him escape on the way thither. And this was the dialogue that took place between prisoner and conductor. Thomas, with that astonishing sang-froid which never deserted him, whether he was threatener or threatened, drew forth a dagger and pistol from his pocket, and showed them to the prince. "You see, monsieur, I have taken my precautions. If you were to try to escape, I should kill you, it's my duty. But as I do not desire to restrict your liberty at all during our journey, nor to humiliate an unfortunate man like yourself, whom I respect, give me your word of honor that you will make no kind of attempt to escape, and you shall be as free as I am." "I give it you, monsieur," replied the prince, who believed he was safer in Thomas's hands than fleeing alone across country. From that moment, the prince could get down from the carriage when he liked, walk up the hills on foot, and wander about at his own pleasure. The conversation, of course, was likely to turn upon one topic only, namely, the events that had just transpired, in which these two actors had each played his own part, one in the high quarters of the palace, the other in the streets. Replying to Thomas's conscientious and somewhat severe reflections upon what he looked upon as the crime of the ordinances, which had led to the fall of Charles X and the arrest of the prince, M. de Polignac replied with a sigh, "Oh, my poor Thomas, who would ever have thought things would have come to such a pass and ended in such a wreck as this?" And once, the prince, who knew his cornet, followed this melancholy expression with these lines: "Chimene qui elut dit. Rodrigue qui elut cru." The prince sighed at the thought of the lot that awaited him, but resignedly. He wore more the expression of a Christian martyr than of a vanquished general. He interrogated Thomas as to the probable issue of the great trial that would ensue. "Good heavens," replied Thomas, "the whole matter depends on the type of jury that is summoned to judge your case. If you are tried by a jury, both you and your colleagues will be condemned to death. If you are tried before the Chamber of Peers, you will be merely sentenced to imprisonment." "That is exactly my own opinion," M. de Polignac calmly replied. After this coincidence of ideas, silence fell between the two travelers, during which time daylight began to lighten the darkness that had enshrouded the first portion of their journey. Thomas was struck with the sight of the ex-minister's long, easily recognizable profile, sharply defined against the increasing light, as the horses' feet rattled on the pavement of a town where the shops were being cheerily opened, and the citizens were leisurely standing in little groups in the square, eager for any fresh news that might be going about. Thomas thought their carriage was the object of some attention. He was, however, obliged to change horses at the Hôtel de la Poste, which was situated in the square, and short though their halt was, it might prove quite long enough for the prince to be recognized, and for the news to create a sensation throughout the town. With what result it was impossible to calculate. Thomas wore a cap with a broad peak. He threw this over the prince's aristocratic face and wrapped his comforter round his neck. Thomas called this proceeding extinguishing his prisoner. When the inquisitive townsfolk came and looked in at the door of the carriage and saw, by the side of Thomas's round, open, cool face, a bonneted figure shrouded in a neck wrapper, no suspicion was aroused in their breasts, and the carriage started off with fresh horses at a tearing pace. This maneuver was repeated at nearly every place of relay. When Thomas related these incidents, it was with a certain degree of melancholy. He did not forget that prison, and perhaps even death, awaited his traveling companion at their journey's end, he who on more than one occasion, indeed, was to confront in a court of justice the alternative of death or imprisonment. On 28 August, the 3 prisoners from Tours and the one from Saint-Lô reached Paris almost simultaneously. They were all 4 shut up in that portion of the Château of Vincennes that was called the Queen's Pavilion, Pavillon de la Reine. 3 of them were new men. Indeed, they were scarcely known to anybody before the fatal day of misfortune that overtook them. They had gained their notoriety, or rather their unpopularity, by the printing of 100,000 copies of Barthélemy's and Murray's verses, and by the oral skits recited against M. de Peyronnet in particular, by the celebrated Chodruc Duclos. We shall have occasion later to speak of this modern Diogenes. We allude, of course, to Chodruc Duclos and not M. de Peyronnet, who for 7 or 8 years troubled the galleries of the Palais Royal, where at all hours of the day he displayed his unbuttoned coat, his hardly decent trousers, his waistcoat fastened together with string, his sandal shoes, his battered old hat, and the thick growth which covered the lower half of his face, which had earned him the nickname of the man with the long herd. Then, as we have said, apart from these verses of Barthélemy's and Murray's, and the Bordelaisian legends made up by Chodruc Duclos, du Chanteloz, Gernon Ranville and de Peyronnet were almost unknown. It was very different in the case of M. de Polignac. Apart from the claim of his family that they had descended from the same stock as Sidon Apollinaire, the Polignacs are of historic celebrity. In the first place, they were old conspirators. Cardinal Melchior de Polignac, the author of El Anti-Lucrece, had plotted against the regent at the beginning of the previous century. Prince Jules de Polignac had conspired against Napoleon in the beginning of the present one, and their women had played their part during the French Revolution. The Comtesse Diane and the Duchesse Jules, those two inseparable friends of the Queen, will both be remembered. The Duchesse Jules in particular, to whom Marie Antoinette gave a layette of 100,000 crowns and a duchy worth $1.5 million. Comte Jules de Polignac, the promoter of the ordinances, was her second son. He was made prince in 1817 or 1818 by Pius Roman VII, a prince of Rome, of course. Having emigrated in 1789, he had returned to France in 1804, together with his eldest brother, Armand, on purpose to take part in the conspiracy of Cadoudal and Pichegru. He was about to be condemned, or was, I believe, even condemned to death, but the persistent intercession of Josephine saved his life. All these facts went to magnify the importance of the prisoner, whose trial was soon to take place. After an exile of 26 years, including imprisonment, ambassadorship, peerage, and ministry, he returned in 1830, under the incubus of a second fatal accusation, to the same dungeon at Vincennes, where he had been incarcerated for the same cause of monarchism in 1804. The order had been issued for the transference of the prisoners from the Pavillon de la Réunie to the dungeons. M. de Polignac was the first to leave it. I have seen him several times at the house of Madame du Caylus. He was an extremely fine-looking man, with his white hair and lordly bearing, his haughty manners, and a preeminent air of distinction. But it should be admitted that none of these qualities impressed the people very much. They are often a reason for condemning a person. In the First Revolution, a fine skin and beautiful linen were quite sufficient grounds for sending a man to execution. There were several courts to pass through before you could get from the Pavillon de la Réunie to the dungeon, and these courts were crowded with soldiers of the Gardes Nationaux and from the garrison. M. de Polignac appeared bareheaded between two grenadiers. There was some slight disorder in his dress which was not usual. When he reached the staircase, his strength, if not his courage, failed him. He reeled and kept himself from falling by leaning his hand on the end of a grenadier's gun. The bearing of M. de Peyronnet was quite different. Extremely brave, he sometimes made the mistake of extending his courage to the point of insolence. He also kept his hat on and looked to left and right disdainfully as he went. A low man out of the crowd took aim at him, crying, "Down on your knees, you who ordered the people to be fired upon." M. de Peyronnet shrugged his shoulders, remained with folded arms, and never either hastened or slackened his pace. M. de Chantelaz looked ill and pale and downcast, and seemed overcome by the gravity of the situation. M. de Gurnon-Ranville showed a nervous courage and ill temper. The three commissioners appointed to examine the ex-ministers were de Berenger, Madier de Monchau, and Mauguin. Fro August, directly the arrest of the ministers was known, the abolition of the death penalty was proposed in the chamber by M. Victor de Tracy and supported by Lafayette. On the 6th of the following October, M. de Berenger, charged with the report of the examination of the prisoners, asked for the adjournment of the proposition. Then Lafayette rose a second time, and with that weighty personal bearing which men who have seen, and done, and suffered much acquire, he exclaimed, "It is proposed to adjourn the question of the abolition of the death penalty, gentlemen, but doubtless, those who propose to do so have never had the misfortune to see, as I myself have seen, their families, friends, and the leading citizens of France dragged off to the scaffold. They have not, I say, had the misfortune of seeing unfortunate persons sacrificed under the pretext that they were Fayetists. I am entirely opposed to the death penalty, especially for political offenses. I therefore implore the Chamber to take M. de Tracy's proposal into consideration." M. de Carotry immediately mounted the tribune, and with that eloquence which is more remarkable for heart than head, made the following speech. "I attest before you all that, were it possible to assemble the parents and friends of the courageous victims of July in this building, and to ask them, do you demand blood for blood? Decide. The silent jury would shake their heads in token of refusal and return to their noble griefs and deserted hearths. If I am wrong, I will appeal in spirit to the manes of the noble victims themselves. I will call upon them to reform this unworthy sentence, for I know that brave souls, who risk their lives for a sacred cause, do not shed blood except during the conflict. These two speeches, of which I have only given the most salient points, roused such enthusiasm in the assembly that it was decided, there and then, to send an address to the king, to propose the suppression of the death penalty in cases laid down by the commission. That same evening, a special sitting was held, and the address was read and sent. But it must be mentioned that the enthusiasm which had carried away the chamber did not lay hold of the people, nor move the Republicans in the very slightest degree. Now, why did the people, usually generous, why did the Republicans, thoroughly interested in the abolition of the scaffold, on which the heads of some among their number might easily fall, declare in favor of the death penalty? Because they knew very well that this Augustan clemency was artificial, that it would be proclaimed loudly as long as it might be useful to the political situation of the moment, but that they would soon return to following the old track from the Place de Grève and the Place de la Révolution. Because, with gloomy looks and pressed lips, they said to themselves what Eusebe Salvert alone had had the courage to say in the chamber. A man urged by hunger and misery, by the sight of his wife and children without bread, a man who has not eaten anything for 3 days, attempts to steal and is taken in the act, kills in order to escape the galleys, and is condemned to death and executed. Then society cries out, "Bravo, quite right. The man was a thief, an assassin and an infamous wretch. He deserved the scaffold. Long live the scaffold." But a statesman in cold blood orders the massacre of 10,000 of his fellow citizens, on purpose to climb to his ambitious ends across their heaped-up bodies. Such a man inspires you with pity and not with horror. You would say to him, "You wish to have our heads chopped off, but to keep your own on your shoulders, and go into a foreign country to enjoy the riches you have amassed." Time will look after such a theft, passions will die down, public and private grievances be appeased. The history of our troubles, written on our walls by the print of bullets and grapeshot, will no longer be legible. Then public compassion will rise up against the length of your exile. It will demand your respite, and for the third, fourth time, you will bring your country to the edge of the abyss, into which you will finally succeed in flinging it. Why should such a distinction be made? Unless it is because, not having had the courage to strike down your victim yourself, as the poor starved wretch did, you pay soldiers and make them the instruments of your crime. This is what M. Salvert had said. This is what the people and the Republicans were saying. Now, as they are soon going to begin again to fire upon the people and the Republicans, as they are going to begin July over again with diametrically opposite results. As for 18 years it is the conquerors of the 3 days who are going to be the conquered, it is good to draw the dividing line very distinctly, and not merely to state, as they did. The Chamber and royalty of July desired the abolition of the death penalty, but the people and Republicans would not agree to it. You are mistaken, they did wish it. But, as a principle which should safeguard humanity at large, and not as a means of delivering a few privileged guilty people from justice. What they did not want was that as exceptional tribunals are created for the purpose of punishing, there should not be established, this time, exceptional tribunals for absolving. They wanted the people to be looked on as a sovereign power, and that those who had caused them to be shot down should be dealt with in the same way as those who, later, were to fire on the king. Why, therefore, should a greater indulgence be granted to Polignac, de Peyronnet, de Chanteloz, and de Guernon-Ranville, who killed or wounded 3,000 citizens, than to Alibod, Munier, and Lecomte, whose plot fell through when firing on the king and who neither killed nor wounded a single person? It will probably be argued that the difference in punishment arose from sentence being delivered by different tribunals. But this was not so. The sentence which condemned some to prison and others to the scaffold came from the same jury, the Court of Peers. The people were right, then, after seeing Marechal Ney condemned to death, to complain loudly when they knew the ministers were going to be let off. They did not wish their heads to fall, guilty though they were. No, the people wished they should do in 1830 what they failed to do in 1793. They wanted their condemnation and that they should appeal against the sentence to the people direct. Then, as M. de Carotry said, they would have received pardon. But they were not even consulted. It was the king who owed his crown to the Revolution, his civil list of 18 millions of income and 10 or 12 royal castles, who pardoned them, and not the people who had been shot down, assassinated and decimated. Thus an undertone of discontent spread over the city, whilst the anger that was settling in the base of the social scale began to rise to the surface in hot bubbles. On 18 October, the walls of the Luxembourg were covered in the night with menacing placards. 2 or 3 of those bands of men, only to be found during ill-omened seasons, came out of the catacombs, so to speak, and spread through the town singing La Parisienne and crying, "Death to the ministers." Some even went further and carried a flag on which the above bloodthirsty wish was written in huge letters. This band started from the Pantheon, crossed the Pont Neuf, and went in the direction of the Palais Royal. The ministers held council together. At these rumors and cries and the uproar which filled the square, as on the day when they carried the head of the Princess de Lamballe on a pike, the king and Odelin Barrett advanced to the edge of the terrace. The people never uttered a single cry of "Vive le Roi," but shouted "Vive Odelin Barrett" at the top of their voices. Odelin Barrett was greatly embarrassed by this popularity, which was thus contrasted publicly with the unpopularity shown towards the king. But Louis-Philippe laughed. "Oh," said the king, "don't heed their cries, Monsieur Barrett. In 1792, I heard the fathers of these very people shout, 'Vive Pétion,' as now these men are shouting, 'Vive Barrett.'" Chapter 3. Outard tells me that Louis-Philippe wishes to see me. Visit to M. de Villaine. Houghton, supernumerary horse guardsman. My interview with the king about La Vendée and the policy of just milieu. Bixio, an artilleryman. He undertakes to get me enrolled in his battery. I send in my resignation to Louis-Philippe. It was in the midst of all these troubles that I had arrived. And what I have just told in the preceding chapter, and the very want of method in my telling it, depict plainly enough the strange state of exasperation which people's minds had reached. I had handed my report to General Lafayette, and he, no doubt, had sent it to the king. For 5 or 6 days after my return, I received a letter from Outard asking me to go and see him. I therefore at once presented myself at the Palais Royal. In spite of all that the old head of my office had done to me, I had a real affection for him. My conviction was that, like M. de Villaine, he had thought me stupid, and that, under this delusion, he had set himself to oppose my work. "How is it," Outard asked me, "that you have been back in Paris 8 or 10 days, and we have not seen you sooner?" "But my dear Outard," I said, "you know very well I no longer regard myself as a member of these offices. Allow me to reply to this, that, so long as you do not send in your resignation, we look upon you as belonging to us." "Is that all?" I said, picking up a pen and paper. "Then it won't take long to alter it." "There," said Outard, stopping my hand, "you always find time to commit some foolish act or other. At all events, I should be much obliged if you would do it somewhere else than in my office." I laid down the pen, and resumed the seat I had been occupying in front of the fireplace. There was a moment's silence. "Do you not wish to see the king?" "What for?" "Why, if only to thank him for the pardon he granted you for your false money coiner." "It was not for me that he did that, it was for you." "You are mistaken. Your letter was laid before him, and on it he wrote, 'Granted.' You shall thank him for me, dear friend. You know much better than I do how to address crowned heads." "Bah, you were very particular as to how one should address Charles X." "Ah, that was a different thing. He was a king of the old order with the tradition of his race. He was a Bourbon and not a Valois." "Chut, don't say such things here." "Because they will cause shame or perhaps feelings of remorse." Outard shrugged his shoulders. "You are incorrigible," he said. Another short silence intervened. "So," said he, "you have no desire to see the king?" "None whatever." "But suppose he wants to see you?" "The king, go along, you are joking." "Suppose I was commissioned to settle the hour for an audience with him?" "You know, of course, my dear fellow, I should not have such bad taste as to refuse, but I do not believe you have received any such commission." "Then you are wrong again. The king expects you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." "Oh, my dear fellow, how disagreeable the king will find me." "Why?" "Because I am a perfect bear when I am made to get up at such early hours as that." "Will you dine today with me?" "With whom beside?" "Lamy and Apert, will that please you?" "Excellently well." "Then at 6 o'clock tonight." We shook hands and separated. I took advantage of being at the Palais Royal to pay a series of calls. I went first to see Lassagne, who was as good-natured and amusing as ever. Then I saw Ernest, who had risen a peg higher, then my friend de la Ponce, who from my old habits thought I had come to ask him to put on his coat and hat. Then lastly, on M. de Villaine. I entered his room, as usual, unannounced. He was as short-sighted as a mole, and was writing with his face close to his paper, effacing the letters that he traced with his pen with the hairs of his nostrils. At the noise I made as I approached his writing table, he lifted his head and recognized me. "Ah, there you are," he said, "Monsieur Bully. Here I am, true enough. I advise you to return to Soissons." "Why?" "Because you will get a warm reception there." "Bah, have they become wicked there? I wonder you weren't ashamed to cause such a scandal in your own part of the country. By the by, I have something to ask of you." "For yourself?" "God forbid." "Then for whom?" "For my fellow companion, on that occasion." "Which, there were 3 of you." "Houghton." "What do you want for him?" "I want a place as supernumerary in the Horse Guards." "Good, do you think such posts are given away like that?" "Of course." "What has he done to deserve such a favor?" "Done? Why, you know he went to Soissons with me." "A fine recommendation, indeed." "What will you bet that you will give me the post for him?" "What will you bet?" 25 louis. "Did one ever see such a rascal as you are?" "Let us bet." "Why, you may put a pistol to my head, as you did to the commandant of Soissons." "Oh dear no, I know well enough such a method would not succeed with you." "That is a fortunate thing for me. But I shall get someone to ask you for the favor whom you will not care to refuse." "Who is that?" "General Lafayette." "General Lafayette, he has something better to do than to draw up petitions." "You are right, I will ask it direct from the king." "From the king?" "Yes, I shall see him tomorrow." "Have you asked for an audience?" I shook my head. "If you have not, how can you see him?" "I shall see him, because he wishes to see me." "The king wishes to see you." "At least, so he has sent me word by Outard." "What does he want to see you about?" "I have no idea, to converse with me, I suppose." "To converse with him? Good heavens, what an incredible cheek the fellow has. What shall you tell the king if you do talk to him?" "What he is quite unaccustomed to hearing, the truth." "If you think you will make your way with such principles as that, you are greatly mistaken." "My way is made, and you know better than anybody else in the world that neither you nor he helped me to make it." "Oh, by the gods, I feel as though I were talking to his father once more." "We might be more unlike, you will admit." "I thought your friend Houghton was well off." "Ah, we are coming back to him." "Why not?" "He is rich, since he is asking for a place as supernumerary. A runner after young ladies." "What the devil else should he run after boys?" "A poacher." "I have heard you say a score of times that it was good poachers who made good keepers." "We will see, send him to me the first time he comes to Paris." "I will bring him along myself." "Nothing of the kind, you have such a way of getting round me." "Ah, yes, say that to Henry Roman III. And Christine, and you will see what they will reply." "What are you doing now?" "Nothing." "Idle fellow." "But I shall soon be at work again, in all probability." "What will you do?" "I shall fight." "Fight against whom?" "Against the powers that be, there." "Be off with you, and the quicker the better. I never heard such a thing, fancy coming to talk such treason to me." "Au revoir, cousin." "I your cousin, it is a lie, I'd rather be cousin to the devil. Ferris, Ferris." Ferris appeared. "Do you see this gentleman?" M. de Villaine said, pointing at me with his finger. "Yes," replied the astonished Ferris. "Well, when he presents himself at my office, you can tell him I am not at home." "I don't care for Ferris, I shall enter without his leave." "You would enter without asking him." "Most certainly." "Well then, I shall fling you out of the door." "You." "Do you suppose I should hesitate to do so?" "You." "Would you like a sample now?" Upon my word I should. Ah, you dare me to it, then look out. M.D. Villain got up and flew furiously at me. I threw my arms round his neck and kissed him on both cheeks. He stopped short, and something very like a tear glistened on his eyelid. You can go, Ferris, he said, then laying his hand on my shoulder. What troubles me is that with such a character as yours, you will die in a garret like your father before you. Come, Houghton shall have his post off with you. I must get to work. But before I left the building, I had posted a letter to Houghton telling him to come to Paris as fast as he could, and telling him the news which he was not expecting. Let us say at once that 3 months later Houghton was made a supernumerary, and 18 months later he was entered on the lists, which in bureaucratic parlance means that he received a salary. Next day I was at the King's Palace as 8 o'clock was striking. I had donned my riding uniform of the National Guards for this important occasion. Whether by chance or by premeditation, the king received me in the same chamber in which he had given me audience the day before the first representation of my Henry Roman III, when he was Duc d'Orléans. I did not find him changed either in looks or manner. He had the same affectionate smile and good-natured expression that were so difficult to resist, the smile which had won him Lafitte's fortune, Casimir Perrier's health, and M. Thier's reputation. Good day, Monsieur Dumas, he said to me. I bowed. So you have returned from La Vendée? Yes, sire. How long were you there? 6 weeks, sire. I have been told that you made a very exhaustive study of the country, and one deserving enough to be brought under my notice. By General Lafayette, doubtless. Precisely. I thought he had done more than that, and had himself presented my report to you, sire. Quite true, but I find a lacuna in that report. I bowed in token that I was waiting to hear more. You were sent by General Lafayette, the king continued, to study the possibility of establishing a National Guard in La Vendée, and you hardly mention either the possibility or impossibility of such a thing. True, sire, on the ground that the study of the locality convinced me that the establishment of a National Guard in the departments of La Loire Inférieure, Maine-et-Loire, La Vendée and Deux-Sèvres would for the time being be ruinous to the middle classes of society, which have their business to attend to as notaries, drapers, cloth-weavers, locksmiths, joiners, barristers, trading either wholesale or retail, in a word, but have no time for horse exercise and drilling. It would, moreover, be a dangerous measure for this reason. The citizens who wore the uniform would become blues again, and those who did not wear it would be chouans. That is why I have nearly abandoned the idea and laid stress on the opening out of roads, on the furthering of communication, to act, as they say in medicine, as a species of dissolvent, rather than by revulsives. Let the Vendeans get away from the influence of the nobles, and their women from the influence of the priests, and no more Vendean insurrections will be possible. Well, Monsieur Dumas, I am of a different opinion from yours. I believe that a Vendée is no longer possible because there are no Vendeans left. Tell me, where are the Elbas, the Bonchamps, the Lescures, the Laroche Jacquelins and the Tourettes? Sire, where they were in 1789. However, La Vendée need not be feared now or in the immediate future. I would go further still, and say that it would never again rise by itself, but somebody might throw himself into La Vendée and cause it to rise. Who? Not the Dauphin, he has not energy enough for that, nor the Duc de Bordeaux, he is too young, nor Charles X, a king would be out of place at the head of a handful of rebels. The king knows general history too well not to be acquainted with the history of Hungary. Moriamer pro nostro, rege Maria Theresa. The Duchesse de Berry. She is much talked about. You are right, I have myself thought so often, but remember carefully what I tell you, Monsieur Dumas. There will be no Vendean rising without England, and I am sure of England. I did not urge on the king that there might be a terrible, implacable, fierce Vendean outburst, like that of 92 and 93. I did not tell him that there might, perhaps, be 20, 30, or 40,000 men in arms as before, nor that there would be disastrous, fatal, and deadly battles, such as those of Ponts-de-Cé, Torfou, and Antrain. I did not tell him that the rising of the West would be supported by a rising in the South and by a foreign invasion. I said that there was a chance, a probability, and almost a certainty of fighting, and that men would be killed, that fresh hatreds would be born out of the renewed bloodshed, and that the king would be too careful of the spilling of French blood not to set himself in opposition to such proceedings as far as he had means in his power. The king smiled. I tell you, Monsieur Dumas, that I have put my finger on the pulse of La Vendée. I am a bit of a doctor, as you know. I bowed. Well, there is nothing going on there, nor will there be. The king will allow me not to attempt to combat his opinion, I replied, laughing, but to remain of my own way of thinking. Of course, you know that my influence does not extend over people's opinions, unfortunately, or I should have tried to modify yours and those of some other friends of yours. Meanwhile, as the conversation has fallen on this subject, Your Majesty may wish me to say what I think. On the disposition of La Vendée. And on the policy of the king. Tell me what you think of both. Well, I think that a foreign war, upon the Rhine or in Italy, would be a popular one at the present moment, that the king does not care to bring about such a war, and that he is not sorry to have an excuse for not doing so. Ah, indeed. La Vendée would offer him such an excuse. How so? No doubt, as the king said just now, he is a doctor. When he has to answer those who talk of the Belgian, Italian, or Polish nationality, he will say, Pardon, messieurs, before busying ourselves with the affairs of other peoples, France has first to cure herself of an internal inflammation. When they turn their gaze in the direction of La Vendée, and hear the sound of firing and see the smoke of battle, no one will have anything to reply. The king will then only concern himself with people of his own nationality, and even the most fiery propagandists will see that we have not taken upon us the responsibility of foreign bloodshed. The king bit his lips. I had evidently hit home. Monsieur Dumas, he said, politics are a melancholy profession. Leave it to kings and governors. You are a poet, attend to your poetry. Pardon me, I do not follow. I merely mean that, being a poet, you see things as a poet. I bowed again. Sire, I said to him, the ancients called their poets vates. The king signed with his hand, implying, Monsieur Dumas, your audience is at an end. I know what I wanted to know from you and you can retire. I understood the sign, and I did not wait to have it repeated. I went out as far as I could backwards, so as not to shock those ideas of etiquette of which the Duc d'Orléans had tried hard to give me a lesson one day, when King Charles X had come to the famous ball at the Palais Royal. I met Outard on the staircase. Have you seen the king? He asked me. I am just leaving him, I replied. Well, yesterday we were only half at variance. And now? Today it is otherwise, we are wholly so. Blockhead, he muttered. I waved him an adieu with my hand, and ran laughing down the stairs. As I was returning home, I met Bixio on the Pont des Tuileries. He was clad in a blue military coat with red epaulets and forage cap, and had a ball of red horsehair on his shako, with stripes of red down his trousers. Hullo, I said, what are you in? In the artillery. Is there an artillery then? Certainly. Of whom does it consist? Of all our Republican friends, Grouvel, Guinard, Cavaignac, Etienne Arago, Bastide, Thomas and myself, etc. I should like to join it too. That will be difficult, because of your position near the king. Mind, I have broken off with him completely. Then you are free. As free as air. Besides, there is another way of making myself freer still. Which is? To send in my resignation this very day. If that be the case, I will undertake to get you admitted. I believe they are 1 or 2 men short in the 4th battery. You haven't any special preference, have you? No. Besides, it is mine. In that case, I have a preference. Have me received into the 4th battery. I will mention it tonight to Cavaignac and Bastide. Is it agreed upon? Rather, yes. Au revoir. Au revoir. I went home, took paper, pen and ink, and wrote the following letter of resignation. Sire, my political opinions being entirely out of harmony with those your Majesty has the right to insist upon in persons who compose your household, I beg your Majesty to accept my resignation of the post of librarian. I have the honor to remain, yours respectfully, etc. Alex Dumas. I apologize for the style, which was that of the period, Then I put a short note to Bixio in the post containing this one line. Alia jacta est. We shall see later how, as my letter never reached the hands of the king, I was obliged to send in my resignation a second time, which was inserted in the papers and repeated in the preface to Napoleon. Chapter 4. First performance of La Mire et la Fille. I have supper with Harel after the performance. Harel imprisons me after supper. I am sentenced to 8 days in forced work at Napoleon. On the 9th day the piece is read to the actors, and I am set at liberty. The rehearsals. The actor Charles, his story about Nodier. On the same table upon which I had just written my letter of resignation lay a letter, in a handwriting that I recognized as Harel's. I opened it in fear and trembling that he was going to speak to me again about the wretched Napoleon drama, which had become quite a nightmare to me, but nothing of the kind. He sent me a box for the first performance of La Mire et la Fille and an invitation to supper with him afterwards. I sent my ticket to Marie Nodier, keeping one place for myself. I had neglected my dear friends of the Arsenal for a long time and was very anxious to see them again. I reached the Odeon by 8 o'clock. I have previously expressed my opinion upon La Mire et la Fille. It is one of Mazer's best plays and quite M's best. Frederick was sublime in his artless, poignant grief, his restrained despair. The other parts were, in theatrical parlance, by N. Tennis, well sustained. Marie and Madame Nodier wept, and so did Madame de Tracy. The authors won a triumphant ovation in tears. Lacroix, Janin and I reached Harel's house by midnight, when we congratulated him on his success. Harel received our compliments rubbing his hands together and stuffing snuff up his nostrils, with never a word about the Napoleon play. I could not tell what had come over him, and began to think that he had given the play to another to write. This silence seemed all the stranger to me, since M. Crosnier was making fabulous sums with his Napoleon à Schönbrunn. The supper was in the style of those sumptuous, delightful ones that George's was wont to give us. She made a glorious queen at such feasts, as she dispensed the finest fruits from Chevet with her beautiful, goddess-like hands. When Harel, Janin, and Lacroix were present, there was the very finest flow of wit imaginable. At 3 in the morning we were still at table. Notwithstanding all this, there were signs in the atmosphere which savored of some conspiracy. Glances were exchanged, smiles returned, and significant words bandied about. When I asked for explanations, everybody gazed in astonishment. They laughed in my face, and I felt as though I had just come from Carpentra's. True enough, I had come from Quimper, which was nearly the same thing. We all rose from the table, and George's took me into another room with the excuse that she wanted to show me something extremely beautiful. What was it she showed me? I cannot say, but whatever it was fascinating enough to keep me from returning to the salon for over a quarter of an hour. When I returned, Lacroix and Janin had disappeared and only Harel remained. It struck 3:30, and I thought it about time to retire. I picked up my hat and was preparing to depart the way I came when Harel said, No, everybody has gone to bed. Follow me this way. I followed him, unsuspectingly. We went through George's room again, then through a dressing room, and finally passed into a room with which I was unacquainted. 2 candles were burning on a table, which was piled up with books and papers of all sizes and dimensions, with pens too of every description. A comfortable bed was resplendent in the gloom with its purple eiderdown in striking contrast with its white sheets and counterpane. On the bearskin rug by the bedside lay slippers all ready to put on. On one side of the fireplace was a velvet sofa, and on the other a great big tapestry-covered armchair. Well, I said, what an invitingly comfortable-looking room. Anybody ought to sleep and work well in such a one. Ah, said Harel, I am indeed enchanted that it pleases you. Why? Because it is for you. How for me? It is yours, and as you will not leave it until you have written me my Napoleon, I had to make things as comfortable as I could for you, to prevent your being in a bad temper during your imprisonment. A shiver passed over me from head to foot. Harel, I exclaimed, don't let us have any foolish tricks, my friend. Exactly so. You made a big mistake in not starting the work when I first asked you, and I made just as stupid a mistake in not giving it to someone else to write. But I had spoken to you, and I keep my word. I therefore think we have both shown ourselves quite stupid enough for 2 men of intellectual attainment, and it is high time we came to our senses once more. Come now, you cannot be thinking what you are doing. I have not even the very faintest plan drawn up for your Napoleon. You told me you rewrote Christine in one night. I should need all kinds of books. Burian, Norvins, Victoires et Conquêtes. There is Victoires et Conquêtes in that corner, there is Burian in another, and Norvins is on the table. I should want the Memorial de Sainte Helene. There it is on the mantelpiece. My son. He shall come and dine with you. And my mistress. Ah, said Georges, who now came into the room, you have just done without her for 6 weeks, you can surely do without her for another fortnight. I began to laugh. At least you will tell her what has happened. She has been told. By whom? By me, said Harold, and she has already received her reward. What was it? A bracelet. I seized hold of George's lovely hands, and addressing my remarks to Harold, I said, Upon my word, my dear friend, you do things in a way it is impossible to get round. Tomorrow I will set to work on your Napoleon, and in a week you shall have it. You are in a great hurry to leave us, my dear boy, Georges said, curling her queenly lip. Good, I said, the play will be finished when I say it is finished. It is Harold who is in a hurry, not I. Harold will wait, said Georges in her grand Cleopatra and Medea style. I bowed, I had nothing further to say. Harold pointed out a toilet table and its fittings, and observed that my room had no other means of access than through that belonging to Georges. Then he went away with her and shut me in. They had even gone so far as to send to my rooms for my trousers. That same night, or rather morning, I set to work and thought out the part of the spy, and the way to divide up the drama. When the role of the spy was thought out, the rest was clear enough. History itself provided the divisions of the play. From Toulon to Sainte Helene, Harold had said to me, I am willing to lay out 100,000 francs if need be. It would have been difficult to provide me with a wider margin. The next morning I began to write. As fast as the scenes were composed, I passed them over to Georges, who in her turn sent them on to Harold, who in his gave them to a charming fellow called Virtuel to copy out. Virtuel is now secretary to the Theatre Francais. The drama was done at the end of the week. It consisted of 24 scenes and contained 9,000 lines. It was 3 times bigger than an ordinary play, 5 times longer than Iphigenie, and 6 times longer than Merope. Frederick was to play the part of Napoleon. I had debated that choice beforehand. Physique seemed to me to be most important in such a creation. The success of the Napoleon at the Porte Saint-Martin was due primarily to Gobert's likeness to the emperor, and nobody could have been less like Napoleon, and especially Bonaparte, than Frederick. My dear fellow, Georges had said to me, remember this, a genius like Frederick can play any part well. The reason struck me as being so good that I gave in, and the part was given to Frederick. By the 9th day the piece was copied out. Virtuel, with the assistance of 2 copyists, had only taken 1 day longer to copy it out than I had to write it. It was not good work, far from it, but the title would assure a popular success, and the part of the spy would be enough to secure literary success. They assembled on the 9th day to hear it read, and I read as far as Moscow. Next day I continued to the end. The part of Frederick alone contained 4,000 lines, that is to say, it was as long as all the parts in Le Mariage de Figaro put together, but to cut nothing out of it during collation seemed impossible, and it was therefore decided that any cutting down should be done at rehearsals. Everybody set to work with an energy I have rarely seen, even learning passages that were likely to be omitted, which is a most difficult thing to get an artist to do. Frederick, Lockroy, and Stocklate were enraptured with their parts. I was set at liberty the night of the reading. There was a supper given me on my release, as there had been before my incarceration. These suppers at George's house were delightful. I reiterate this statement, for they are amongst my happiest memories of the past. No one could possibly have been more beautiful and queenly, more scornful and caustic, more like a Greek courtesan, or a Roman matron, or the niece of a pope, than was George's in her varying moods. The contrast between George's and Mars was incredibly great. Mars was always as affected, reserved, tight-laced and self-contained as the wife of a senator of the empire. And then there was Harold, who was so alert mentally that he always reminded one of a man sitting on a glass stool in touch with an electric battery, with sparks at all his fingertips, and at the end of each of his hairs. When it came to the actual theater, it was found to contain over 100 different parts. For 5 or 6 days, there was a perfect chaos to unravel. I believe I would rather have put the world to rights as described in the Book of Genesis than this world of Napoleon. All the parts melted down, compressed and put together, not including the supernumeraries, made between 80 and 90 persons with speaking parts. Jocelyn de la Salle, stage manager, quite lost his head over it, and Harold emptied 3 snuff boxes full at every rehearsal. As we have said, Harold laid out 100,000 francs in the mounting of the play, but not even M. de Rothschild's cashier would have been capable of calculating the number of brilliant, sparkling, comic expressions he also expended. In the midst of all this hurly-burly, I followed up that everlasting study of dramatic situations and of character which I am looking for always and everywhere, sometimes even in places where they don't exist. Here is an example, for instance. Amongst my troupe leaders, acting in, I know not now what part, one of those small roles called accessoires, emergency parts, I had noticed a good-looking young man of between 25 and 26 years of age, holding a gun as though he had never done anything else all his life long, and what was still more unusual and important, speaking his part fairly well. I must ask my readers to forgive me for being obliged sometimes to use theatrical slang. It expresses things often much better than ordinary language does. Well, it also seemed to me that my accessoire's face was familiar to me, and he, on his side, without being too forward, seemed to smile at me as much as to say, "It is not only at the theater I have seen you." Now where had he seen me? Where had I seen him? This I wanted to find out. I had asked his name. It was Charlotte, the same name as our famous lithographer. The name awoke no recollection in my mind. One day, however, right in the midst of a movement of the old guard, I stopped in front of him. "Excuse me, Monsieur Charlotte," I said to him, "it seems to me I have seen you somewhere. Where, I cannot tell, but I will bet my hat you are not a stranger to me. Can you assist my memory?" "Quite true, monsieur," he answered. "We have seen each other 3 times before, as one does catch sight of people at special times, once in the Rue Saint-Honore, once on the Pont de la Grève, and once at the Louvre." "Oh yes, I remember. On the Pont de la Grève you commanded the attack when the standard-bearer was killed." "That was it," he replied. "You are an actor." "Well, as you see, I am trying to become one." "Why did you wait until I spoke to you?" "I am timid." "Not in the face of bullets, anyhow." "Oh, bullets only kill when all is said." He began to laugh. "I am indeed," he went on, "as timid as I say, to a point you would not believe possible. For instance, I know M. Charles Nodier." "You know Charles Nodier?" "Yes, and quite sufficiently well to have asked him for an introduction to you, or to M. Hugo, or anybody else, but I never dared ask him for one." "You did wrong. Nodier is a capital fellow, and would most certainly have given you such an introduction." "I am well aware of it, although I began by wanting to kill him, but as afterwards I prevented him from being killed, we are quits." "What the deuce are you telling me?" "God's truth." "How did it come about?" "Oh bah, it is too long a story, besides it is not very interesting." "Wrong again, my friend," I said to him. "I am not like ordinary people, everything interests me. As for what you say about the tale being long, well, if it bores me, I will ask you to cut it short. We are not in a suitable place here. Indeed, Jocelyn de la Salle has already twice tried to silence us. They will only think I am asking you your part." Then he burst out laughing, a good open laugh showing lovely white teeth. I like people who can laugh, however poor they are, for it shows they are good-hearted and possess a sound digestion. "Listen," I said to him, "you are not in the next act." "No, nor in the one after that. I only come on again at the burning of Moscow." "Then let us go up to the foyer, and then you can tell me this story." "Ah, nothing would please me better." We went from the theater to the foyer, and sat down in that magnificent gallery which, at night especially, looks like a portico of Herculaneum or an atrium of Pompeii, in the fine shadows that cross it. "Well," I asked Charlotte, putting a hand on his knee. "Well," he said, "it was last 27 July. At that time I was a journeyman cabinet maker. I heard it being said in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, where I was engaged in cutting up some wood, that there had been a riot in the Place de la Bourse the previous night, and that there were crowds gathered round the Palais Royal at that very moment. I was furious over the ordinances, although I did not thoroughly understand where they curtailed our liberty, but I did understand it to be a sort of challenge thrown down to the citizens. I had long been waiting for this moment, and I did not stop to be told twice, but rushed off to see what was going on. When I reached the Marquis des Innocents, I heard platoon firing in the direction of the Halle aux Draps. Then I caught sight of several wounded men, some dragging themselves along as best they could, others carried upon litters, and all expending their remaining strength in shouting to arms. This spectacle exasperated me, and without quite knowing, as I said, which was in the wrong, the people or royalty, I began to shout in my turn, to arms. A wounded man who had no strength left to hold his rifle gave it to me, and some man, I know not who he was, stuffed my pockets with cartridges. Workmen and armed bourgeois, some with swords and some with carbines, were running towards the Rue aux Fers, and I ran with them. Now, whether I ran faster than everybody else, or whether I was more excited, somehow I found myself at their head, and they, seeing me at their head, took me for their leader. Upon entering the Rue aux Fers, we found ourselves opposite a regiment of the Guard. The first line fired. We were so close to the soldiers that the smoke from their rifles enshrouded us like a cloud. In the middle of this cloud, I distinguished a young man stagger and fall down dead a few steps from me. I ran up to him. He was hit in the chest by a bullet that had gone right through, had come out at his back, and must have penetrated his heart. I took him in my arms and carried him away. I was scarcely 50 yards from the troop, but it had ceased firing. For there was nobody in the street but myself, the dead man whom I was holding in my arms, and a tall man with a pale face, who wore a red ribbon in his blue frock coat. It was not worth while wasting powder over us three. I did not really quite know what I was doing. I carried my dead man to the Rue de la Ferronnerie, and the man in the blue coat with the red ribbon followed me. This persistence in keeping me in sight made me suspicious of him. I stopped, and seeing that he was coming up to me, I saved him half his distance by going to meet him. At length we met. I judged from his gentle, sad face that he did not wish to do me harm. However, when I had lain the dead man on the ground, I made my gun ready for any emergency. But without taking any notice of my hostile precaution, he laid a hand on my shoulder, and leaving it there, whilst I gazed at him in much surprise, he said, "My friend, I have been following all your actions for the past hour. I noticed that you had," I said, "and that was why I came towards you instead of waiting till you came up to me. Are you the leader of these men?" "Yes. What does it matter to you, though?" "It matters much," he replied, "for I too am a man." There was so much sweetness in the voice of the unknown that I, who had begun by asking myself whether to put a bullet through him as I saw him following me, felt fascinated and looked on him with a certain respect. "Well then," I said to him, "if you are a man you must see that they are killing our brothers, and you must help us to massacre all these villains of soldiers." He smiled sadly. "But those soldiers are also men," he said. "They are your brothers too, only you act of your own free will, whilst they receive orders which they are obliged to obey. Do you know what the world calls what you are doing your best to bring about? It calls it a revolution, and do you know what that means, eh? I don't know whether I am raising a revolution or not, nor whether a revolution is a good or an evil thing, but I do know what I want." "What is that?" "I want the charter, vive la charte." And then in a word I added, trying to struggle against the moral influence this unknown person was obtaining over me in spite of myself. "Who are you? What are you asking of me? Why do you follow me?" "I follow you because you interest me." "Very well, you also interest me to the extent of offering you this advice. Believe me, you had better take another route." "You will not." "Very well, my friend. Then in that case I shall leave you. Good evening." A dozen men had collected round me. I picked up the dead man, and took my way with my little troop towards the École de Médecine, which I meant to reach by crossing the Seine by the Pont au Change. But great was my astonishment to come across my man again at the corner of the Rue de la Vannerie. He was not content, this time to give me advice, but took hold of my arm and tried to draw me in another direction. "Ah, what the devil do you want with me? We must attend to this," I cried, stamping my foot and giving the dead body to the others to carry. "I want to prevent you and your companions from going to certain death," he said. "There is a whole regiment on the Quai aux Fleurs. What can your 15 or 20 men do against a regiment?" "Sacrebleu," I cried, "you exasperate me beyond bearing. What does it matter to you if I am killed?" "My friend," he said to me, "you must have a father or mother, sister or wife." Well, I wished to save them tears. I felt touched in spite of myself, but I was in the center of men who had chosen me for their leader, and I would not draw back. "You are mistaken," I said. "I possess none of those ties, so be good enough to go your way and leave me to go mine." Then, unhanding myself violently from him, to the école de médecine, I shouted to my companions. To the école de médecine, they repeated, and we rushed on to the place du Châtelet. Sure enough, there was a regiment drawn up on the other side of the Seine on the Quai aux Fleurs. Vive la ligne! We shouted, making for the Pont au Change and shaking our guns. But instead of fraternizing with us, the colonel ordered us to withdraw. We took no notice of his injunction, but continued on our way. We were not more than a third of the way across the bridge when the regiment fired upon us. It was indeed a carnage. 2 or 3 men fell round me, the others took to flight and deserted our dead man. I do not know why I was so set on this dead body. I thought it might be useful both as a standard and as a safeguard. I picked it up and beat a retreat to the place du Châtelet. What remained of my recent troop was waiting for me, and in the forefront was that persistent man of the blue coat and red ribbon. "Well, my poor fellow," he said, "what did I tell you? 3 or 4 of your men are killed and as many wounded. It is a miracle that you are alive. They probably fired 50 rounds at you. For heaven's sake, do not do any more such mad things. Come, follow me." "Oh, that is the way the wind blows, is it?" I said. "You red-ribboned man, do you know that you are beginning to annoy me intensely, and that if you push me much further I shall end by telling you to your face what I am thinking about you?" "What is that?" "Why, that you are probably a spy." When some of my men heard the word spy, they exclaimed, "What do you say, he is a spy?" And, taking aim at the unknown, they exclaimed, "If he is a spy, let us shoot him." I was terrified at this action, for something told me that the man did really mean kindly by me. "No, no," I cried, "what are you thinking of? Down arms, sacrebleu." "But you said he was a spy," several voices explained. "I did not say that. On the contrary, monsieur is a neighbor of mine and knows me. You heard him mention my mother and remind me that if I got killed she would be left without anyone to support her." A spy indeed, go along. I went up to my unknown friend and held out my hand. He took it and pressed it cordially. He was as cool as though his life had never been endangered in the slightest. "Thank you, my friend," he said to me. "I will never forget what you have just done for me. You are right, I am no spy. I will tell you more. I am of your political opinions, but I saw the first revolution, and that more than satisfied my taste for revolutions. So now, as I do not wish to see you killed, I will bid you adieu." He left us and knocked at the door of the café of the Pont au Change, which, after some difficulty, admitted him. We others went off in the direction of the Quai de la Mégisserie, in order to reach the Pont Neuf. But we had scarcely gone 40 yards along the quay before we received a volley from the Rue Bertinpoir that killed 4 of our men. And at the same moment, a squadron of mounted police issued from the Place des Tuileries and advanced towards us, filling the whole width of the quay. I looked all round me and found I was alone. I fired my gun in the middle of the police and saw 1 man fall. They had their muskets in hand and fired. I could feel the balls whistle past me, but not a single one hit me. The thought of death never entered my head. I was like one possessed. I receded as they advanced and discharged my rifle a second time, then I hid myself behind the fountain of the Châtelet. I decided to be killed there rather than take to flight. I had reloaded my gun and was taking aim the 3rd time, when I felt someone seize me by the collar of my coat and draw me backwards. I turned round quickly, and it was my blue-coated, red-ribboned stranger once more. "My friend," he said, "you are quite mad. Come and have a glass of eau sucrée with me, and that will bring you to your senses." I felt in my pockets to see if I had enough to pay my reckoning and found I had 10 sous, all I should require, so I replied, "All right, my mouth is very dry, I will gladly drink something." I had chewed 7 or 8 cartridges, and powder, you know, makes one very thirsty. I followed my man and the café door closed behind us. "2 glasses of eau sucrée," he called out. "Oh, not eau sucrée for me, please," I said. "It is too insipid." "What will you have then? A small brandy? I would rather have a kirsch." "All right, kirsch be it." They served me with a glass of kirsch and brought him eau sucrée. "Well," he said, "you are alone. All who were with you are either killed, wounded, or fled." "True," I replied, "but others will take their places. To be killed, or wounded, or flee in their turn. You poor children. If only revolutions really gave you something in return. But after each revolution, I have noticed that the people are more unhappy than before." "Bah," I said, "all the more necessary then that we should have a downright good revolution." "What are you by trade?" the unknown inquired of me. "Journeyman cabinet-maker in the Quartier de l'Arsenal." "How is work in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine?" "There is plenty. Succeed in making your revolution and then see in 6 weeks' time how it is." "Well, the belly may be pinched, but at least we shall be free. You may be starved and have less liberty even than before." He rose. "Listen, my friend," he said. "You told me that you lived in the Quartier de l'Arsenal, I think." Yes. Well then, if, as I fear, work runs short, remember me. Come to the Arsenal Library and ask for the librarian. If I can do you a good turn, be sure I will. He went to the counter, paid, and left. I had noticed signs of understanding going on between the proprietor of the cafe and my unknown friend, and I stayed behind to find out with whom I had been holding intercourse. As I was going up to question the proprietor of the cafe, he approached me. Do you know the person who has just gone out? No, indeed. I should like to know who he is. You say well, for he is one of the best men on earth. The deuce, I said, so much the worse. Why so? If you only knew what name I called him. Called him? Yes, him. I called him a spy. You called him Charles Nodier a spy. What, the man who has just left here and with whom I have been drinking is M. Charles Nodier? The very same. Oh my God. Well, what are you going to do? Run after him, catch him up and beg his pardon. Spy M. Charles Nodier. I shook the door the proprietor had bolted with all my might. The firing began afresh at this moment, and 5 or 6 bullets pierced the shutters and broke the panes of glass. My gun, I shouted. Where is my gun? Oh, the proprietor said, your gun is upstairs. Upstairs, why? Because I have no desire you should be seen going out of here with your rifle, and to have everything in my cafe smashed and broken. When it is dark, I will return your gun, and you can go away. Upon my word, from what M. Nodier told me, you have done quite enough with it for today. A second discharge was heard, and several more bullets came through the shutters. Come, come, said the master of the cafe, it is not safe down here. Let us go upstairs to the first floor. So, taking me by the arm, he drew me towards the staircase. M. Charles Nodier, I repeated as I followed him, half-stunned, and I had called him a spy. I could think of nothing else the whole time I spent in the Café of the Pont au Change, and I was there until 9 o'clock. I returned home, and lay all night thinking of my day's adventure. At this moment, the manager came into the foyer. Oh, Monsieur Dumas, he said, they are hunting for you everywhere. And you here too, Charlotte. You must pay a fine, my friend. A fine, and why? Said Charlotte. Because they did the scene over again, and you were not there. A pretty mess I have got myself into, said Charlotte. Well, I am doing good business. Don't be uneasy, I will settle it all with Jocelyn de la Salle. Have you seen Nodier again since? Oh, not very likely, indeed. After having called him a spy. While I was still warm with excitement, I could have managed to say something to him, but to present myself again to him in cold blood. Never. We returned to the theater, and, as I had promised, I got him off the fine he had incurred through my fault. He was the same Charlotte that Arago had met on 29 July, at the Marquis des Innocents, in command of General Dubourg's escort. We have met again since then. I will relate the occasion and tell what Nodier did for him. Chapter 5. I am officially received into the Artillery Corps of the National Guard. Antony is put under rehearsal at the Théâtre Français. Ill will of the actors. Treaty between Hugo and the manager of the Porte Saint-Martin. Firmin's proposition and confidence. Mademoiselle Mars' dresses and the new gas lights. I withdraw Antony from the Théâtre Français. I offer Dorval the part of Adele. After my liberty had been restored me by my implacable jailer and beautiful jailoress, I returned home, and found several letters waiting for me, 2 only being of importance. One was from Bixio. He had knocked 3 or 4 times at my door, and finding it obstinately closed, he had written to tell me that my admission, when proposed to the heads of the artillery, had been adopted by a large majority. He was requested to ask me in their name if I should like to enter the same battery as M. le Duc d'Orléans. If such was my wish, they would manage to gratify it. Now, the king had decreed that the Duc d'Orléans should join the 1st Artillery Battery of the National Guard. He reckoned upon the prince's conciliatory and excellent disposition to win over to him a corps which proudly boasted itself to be an active basis of opposition, and, as the center of democratic opinions, principles and interests, completely given over to the bourgeoisie. After my rupture with the king, it was out of the question that I should wish to come in contact with his son. I therefore replied to Bixio that I thanked the heads of the artillery department for admitting me into their corps, and that they could place me anywhere it suited them, except in the 1st battery. The second letter came from the Théâtre Français. As the censorship had for the moment disappeared, and Antony was a free agent, it was therefore a question of beginning to rehearse it at once, so I rushed off to the Théâtre Français, where I found Mademoiselle Mars and Firmin. My readers know that Mademoiselle Mars had accepted the role of Adele, and Firmin that of Antony, The remaining distribution of parts was settled there and then. The play was capitally mounted, especially in the subordinate parts. Rose Dupuis played the Comtesse de Lacy, Menjad the young poet, Monrose the subscriber to the Constitutional, and Madame Hervé took Madame de Camps. I say the play was capitally mounted as far as the subsidiary roles were concerned, not that I wish in the very least to attack the genius of Mademoiselle Mars or of Firmin, but great as may be the talent of these artists, except when contrasted with an all-embracing and powerful genius like Talma's, there are parts that depend more or less for success upon the personal character of the individuals who act them. Now, no woman could have been less capable of understanding the entirely modern character of Adele than was Mademoiselle Mars, a character full of subtle contrasts, of strength and weakness, and of extremes of passion and repentance. On the other hand, no man could have been less capable than Firmin of reproducing the gloomy melancholy, bitter irony, fiery passion, and philosophically ramblings of the personality of Antony. Mademoiselle Mars possessed grace, wit, charm, and the art of elocution and coquetry in the highest degree, but she was wanting in that poetic gift which gilds all other qualities with the undefined mystery that constitutes the charm of Shakespeare's women. Firmin possessed Mademoiselle Mars' qualities in a lesser degree, but he was lacking in the fatalism which creates an Orestes in all ages. Tameness is one of the principal requirements of modern drama. Now, Mademoiselle Mars dared not, and Firmin could not, be tame. Let us go further, and state that the Theatre Franchise itself was a bad setting for the picture. There are certain atmospheres in which some creations cannot exist. The rehearsals of Antony were going on concurrently with those of Napoleon. But there was this difference between the two pieces and the two theaters. At the Odeon, everybody was satisfied with his or her own part, and from the manager to the prompter, everyone did his best to help me, while at the Theatre Franchise everyone was dissatisfied with his part, and from manager to prompter, everybody hindered the author and his work. My reader knows Mademoiselle Mars already. I pointed her out at a rehearsal of Hernani pulling to pieces the role of Dona Sol. I am sorry I was in such a hurry. I could have shown her in Antony pulling the part of Adele to pieces. On his side, Firmin plucked the part of Antony as hard as he could. Every feather of slightly vivid coloring made a blur on the kind of gray tint that they wished to give to a work whose ruling theme had, in the first place, been color, so that by dint of plucking out gently each feather the part was quietly transformed into that of a lover on the stage of the gymnase. By the end of a month of rehearsals, the piece, deprived of all its salient features, might have been reduced to 3 acts or even to a single one. One fine morning, the suggestion was made to me to suppress the second and fourth acts, because they made the play too wearisome. I had taken such a disgust for the work that I was quite ready to suppress it entirely. I had even got to the point of believing that Napoleon was the real work of art, and Antony, the common ordinary run of work. They settled the day for the production of it, because they must get it out of the way as it blocked the theatre, which was in urgent haste to put on Don Carlos, O El Inquisition, a drama from which they were expecting great things, but whose author desired to preserve his anonymity at the first performance, and with good reason too. Meanwhile Hugo had sought me out. He had come to realize that we should never be looked upon at the Theatre Franchise by its actors and frequenters, and even by the public itself, as anything but usurpers. The stupid heresies that they had attributed to us concerning Molière, Corneille, and Racine had sprung up in the orchestra, and everyone who was above the age of 50 came nightly to bask voluptuously under the shadow of our audacity. Consequently, Hugo had looked about for and found a theatre which was not an Olympus, where our triumphs would not be regarded as sacrilege, and where those he should cater for would be plain ordinary mortals and not gods. This theatre was the Porte Saint-Martin. He had entered into negotiations with its manager, M. Crosnier, for the taking of Marion Delorme. Thus was realized the prophecy made by Crosnier to Hugo when, on 16 July 1829, the latter had said to him, "Monsieur, you have come too late. There are 2 plays of mine accepted, which have priority over yours." To which Crosnier had replied, "By Jove, monsieur, who knows? In spite of these 2 acceptances I may, after all, be the one to play your works." When treating with Crosnier, Hugo had negotiated in my name as well as his own, subject to my agreement thereto. I thanked him for his friendly attention, but the only 2 plays I possessed were in rehearsal, one at the Odeon and the other at the Theatre Franchise. I should therefore have to wait till I had produced another piece. but I did not need to wait for this. The nearer the day of the first representation of Antony approached, the more I became conscious of the ill feeling throughout the theater. On the other hand, those of my friends who had been present at the rehearsals had gone away shaking their heads, and when urged by me to give them opinions, they frankly confessed that they could not see any play in it at all. I was completely demoralized, for the further I advanced in my dramatic career, the more I lost that early confidence in myself, which had kept me up through all the tribulations connected with Henry Roman III. I began to think I must be deceived, and that there could be absolutely nothing in Antony. Two things happened at the time which ought to have driven me to the extreme of discouragement, but which, on the contrary, restored all my determination. The day of the premiere was fixed for the following Saturday, and it was then Tuesday or Wednesday when Furman took me aside. "My dear friend," he said to me, "I did not want to refuse to act the part of Antony for you, first, because I will play all the parts you assign me. Secondly, because having given me the role of Saint Megrin, which is a good one, you acquired the right to give me a bad one after it." He waited for me to stop him midway, but I, on the contrary, let him say his say out. So he went on. "But you see, I represent the principal character, and I do not wish to take the responsibility of the failure of the play upon myself." "So you believe it will be a failure?" "It is my firm conviction. I do not know how it comes to pass that you, who know the theatrical world intimately, have ventured to risk such a monotonous part. Antony is a heavy twaddler, who from the first to the fifth act does nothing but repeat the same thing over and over again, who gets angry for no reason at all, a species of monomaniac who rages unceasingly, and wages furious warfare against his fellow men." "So that is the effect Antony produces on you?" "Yes." "It does not surprise me. It is exactly what I wished it to do." "Well, that does not matter. I have warned you, remember." "Yes, but it is not enough to warn a man of his fall. You should afford him a means of escaping his fall." "Oh," said Furman, "I, as you know, am an actor and not an author. I act pieces, but I don't create them." "But have you no suggestion to make?" "Yes, I have, but I dare not say it." "Say it, of course." "You will jump as high as the ceiling." "What matter, if I do not come down on your feet?" "Well then." "Well, what?" "If I were in your place, I would take the play to Scribe." "No," I replied, "but I will take it to Crossnear." And going up to the prompter, I said, "Garnier, please give me my manuscript, there's a good fellow." The prompter handed me the manuscript, and Furman watched me take it, astonished. Mademoiselle Mars was waiting all this time until I was free. "Well, my good fellow," she said in the dry tone she always used when she wished to prepare an author for something disagreeable, "have you done talking with Furman? And have you a word left for anybody else?" "Oh, madame," said Furman, "you had but to speak. I am not in the habit of taking your authors away from you. As far as parts such as this man gives me are concerned, you can take him away from me as much as you like." "Good," I said, "this sounds promising." Then, going up to Mademoiselle Mars, "Madame," I said to her, "I am at your service." "Ah, that is fortunate. Do you know what I am going to tell you?" "No, madame, I do not know, but if you will be so good as to inform me, I shall." "I do not intend to act my part in your play on Saturday." "Oh, why not, if you please?" "Because I have spent 1,500 francs on my dresses, and wish them to be seen." "But why can they not be seen on Saturday, as well as on any other day?" "Because we had been promised a new chandelier for Saturday, and the man has just put us off for another 3 months. When there is another chandelier, I will play in your piece." "Ah, madame," I said to her, "there is only one thing likely to put a stumbling block in the way of your kind intention." "What is that?" "In 3 months, my play will have been acted." "How can it?" "It will be." "Where?" "At the Theatre Porte Saint Martin. Adieu, madame, au revoir, Furman." And out I went, carrying my manuscript with me. As I went down the stairs that led from the theatre to the orchestra, I turned my head round, and saw Mademoiselle Mars and Furman together, each exchanging questioning glances and gestures. I regret I am unable to transmit the conversation that ensued between them to posterity. I ran off at once to Madame Dorval, who was then reciting in the Boulevard Saint Martin, in a house with an exit to the Rue Meslay. By chance, she happened to be quite alone. When I was announced, she had my name repeated twice to her. "All right," I shouted from the dining room. "It is I, but perhaps you wish to have me shown outside the door." "Oh, you're a pretty fellow," she said to me, in those drawling accents that were sometimes such a charm in her. "I have not seen you for 6 months." "What would you have me do, my dear?" I said, entering and throwing my arms round her neck. "During that time I have produced a child and a revolution, without reckoning that I have been nearly shot twice. Is this how you greet the ghosts? I cannot embrace you, my good dog." This was the pet name of friendship, even, I may say, of love, that Dorval had given me. Her good dog has remained faithful to his poor Dorval to the end. "Why cannot you greet me more warmly?" I asked. "Because, like Marion Delorme, I am renewing my virginity." "Impossible." "True, on my word of honor, I am becoming respectable." "Ah, my dear, I mentioned making a revolution, here is another one. Who the devil caused this to come about?" "Alfred de Vigny." "Do you love him?" "I cannot speak of it, I am mad over him." "What has he done to keep you to such good resolutions?" "He composes little elevations for me." "In that case, my dear, accept my sincere compliments, for in the first place, de Vigny is a poet of very great talent. Next, he is a true nobleman. Both these attributes are better worth having than a mulatto like myself." "Do you think so?" Dorval said, in a tone of voice she alone knew how to use. "It is my turn now to swear on my word of honor." "Then you didn't come to make love to me?" I burst out laughing, and made some exclamation or other. "No, I could not have received your attentions. Fancy, he treats me like a duchess." "He is perfectly right. He calls me his angel." "Bravo." "The other day, I had a small lump on my shoulder, and he told me wings were beginning to sprout." "You must be immensely amused, my dear." "Yes, indeed. Piccini did not accustom me to such treatment as that." "And Merle's?" "Still less so. By the way, you know Merle and I have married." "Really?" "Yes, it was a means of getting separated from one another. But he ought to be the happiest man on earth." "You think so? He has his café au lait in the morning, and his slippers by his bedside at night. Do you wish to say good day to him?" "Thanks, no, I have come for you." "Ah, you are very cunning, my big dog. But I had forgotten, he is not here, he is away in the country." "I have some news to tell you." "What is it?" "That I have withdrawn Antony from the Theatre Francais." "Oh, you have done well. It was the same with Hugo, you know. He took Marion Delorme from them and brought it to us. I am playing the part of Marion." "Well, what do you think of the piece?" "I think it extremely fine. I do not know how I shall get on, however. Just think verses. Can you imagine me as a tragedienne?" "But I do not think it is your first attempt." "Oh, in Marino Faliero, you mean?" "Goodness, how the part of Helena did bore me. You saw me in that, didn't you?" "Yes." "I was pretty bad in it, was I not?" "Honestly, you were not very good, but I hope you will do better in Adele." "What is Adele?" "Antony's mistress, my dear." "Are you bringing Antony to us, then?" "Why, of course." "And am I to take the part of Adele, my good dog?" "Of course." "3 cheers, then. Upon my word, no matter what happens I must kiss you. Oh, how bad it is of you when I told you I mustn't. Hullo, what is that in your pocket?" "The manuscript." "Oh, give it me to look at." "I am going to read it to you." "What, do you really mean it?" "Certainly I do." "Like this, to me alone?" "Certainly." "Oh, why then, you must think me a great actress." "De Vigny only treats you like a duchess, but I mean to treat you like a queen." She rose and made me a curtsy. "The queen shall be your servant forever, monsieur, in proof whereof I am going to give you a table and offer you. What shall it be? What do you like best while you are reading? Will you have eau de vie, rum, or kirsch?" "I prefer water." "All right then, wait a moment." She went into her bedroom, where I followed her. "Oh, why do you follow me in here?" "Why should I not?" "It is forbidden." Even to me. To everybody, Alexander, I give you warning I will ring my bell. Ah, indeed. Alexander. I would like to settle that question. I bet you will not ring. Alexander. She hung on to the bell rope and rang loudly. I flung myself into an armchair and began laughing like a madman. The chambermaid came in. Louise, said Dorval with perfect dignity, fetch a glass of water for M. Dumas. Louise, in a wash-hand basin, I added. Impertinent fellow, said Dorval. She threw herself upon me and hit me with all her strength. Just when she was beating me with the greatest avidity, someone rang the outdoor bell. She stopped short. Ah, she said, do go quickly into the salon before anybody sees you here, there's a good dog. Suppose I take myself off altogether. What? Suppose we put off our reading till this evening. That would be better still. Shall I go out by the way you know? Yes, yes, till tonight. Would you like me to give Bocage a hint? No, I want to read it over to you first. As you like, but come off with you. Oh, how tiresome it is of de Vigny to come just at this moment. What can you expect, my poor friend? We are not to have everything our own way in this world. Goodbye until tonight. Until tonight, then. She shut the door of her bedroom, quickly just as the sitting-room door opened. Oh, good day, my dear Comte, she said. Come and sit here by me. I was expecting you impatiently. Meanwhile, Louise lifted the Persian portière curtain and beckoned me to follow her. I put a louis in her hand. She gazed at me in astonishment. Well, what is the matter? I asked. Things are to be then, as though Madame had not rung. Precisely. Shall we not see you again? Oh yes, I return tonight. Ah, now I understand. Well, no, you do not. That is possible too, I can't help it. What is to be done? For the past 6 months the world has been topsy-turvy here. Ah, monsieur, you whom Madame loves so much, you ought indeed to tell her that she is lost. She was right, poor Louise. But we will explain in another place why she was right. Chapter 6. My agreements with Dorval. I read Antony, her impressions. She makes me alter the last act there and then Merle's room, Bocage as artist, Bocage as negotiator, reading to M. Crosnier. He falls into a profound slumber. The play nevertheless is accepted. I returned that night, and found Dorval alone and expecting me. Upon my word, I exclaimed, I did not dare hope for a tete-a-tete. I said I had a reading. Did you say who the reader was? Oh no, but first come here, sit down by me and listen to what I have to say, good dog. I let her lead me to an armchair, and I sat down. She stood in front of me with both her hands in mine, and she looked gently and kindly at me. You love me, don't you? She said. With all my heart. You love me really. Don't I say so? For myself. For yourself. You do not wish to cause me pain. Good God, no. You wish me to play your part. Of course, since I have brought it to you. You do not want to spoil my career. Why, you must be mad to suggest such a thing. Very well then, do not tease me again as you did this morning. I should not have strength enough to defend myself, and I am happy as I am. I love de Vigny and he worships me. You know there are certain men one cannot deceive, men of genius who, if they are once deceived, well, so much the worse for the women who deceive them. My dear Marie, I said to her, you are the noblest and best-hearted woman I know. Here is my hand upon it, I will not exceed the bounds of friendship. Oh, let us understand one another. I do not say such a condition shall last forever. It shall last, at all events, until you give me back my promised word. Agreed, if some day I am tired of our bond, I will write to tell you. To me. To you. Before all others. Before all others, for you know quite well how I love you, my good dog. Oh, now we will read. I hear it is splendid. Why would not that stuck-up minx Mademoiselle Mars play the part? Oh, because she had spent 1,500 francs on her dresses, and the chandelier does not give sufficient light to show them off. You know I cannot afford to spend as much as 1,500 francs on my dresses, but you need not be anxious. I will find means to bedeck myself properly. Adele, then, is a society woman. How I shall enjoy playing such a part. How well you must know how such a type should be acted. I, who have never played anything but the fishwife kind of woman. Come, quick, sit down there and begin reading. I began to read, but she had not the patience to sit in her chair. She got up and leant on my back and read over my shoulder with me. After the first act, I looked up and she kissed me on my forehead. Well, I asked her. Well, it seems to start very oddly. Things will come to a pretty pass if they go on in the same way as they have begun. Wait and see. I began the second act. As I proceeded with my reading, I could feel the agitated heaving of the excellent actress's bosom against my shoulder. At the scene between Adele and Antony, a tear dropped on my manuscript, then a second and a third. I raised my face to kiss hers. Oh, how vexatious of you, she said, to interrupt in the middle of my enjoyment. Do go on. I continued, and again she wept. It will be recollected that Adele flies at the end of the act. Ah, said Dorval, sobbing, there's an honest woman, I should never have been able to do that. You, I said, are a love. No, monsieur, I am an angel. Let us go on with the third act. Ah, my goodness, if only he rejoins her. I read the third act and she listened, trembling with excitement. It ends with the broken window and the handkerchief applied to Adele's mouth, and by Adele being flung into her room, after which the curtain falls. Well, what next? Said Dorval. Of course you know what Antony does after that. Why, he ravishes her, I suppose. Rather, only she does not ring. So? What? Good, what an ending to a third act. You do not mince matters. This act will be a little bit difficult to play. You just see how I will say, this door will not shut. And no accident has ever happened in this inn. There is only the cry when I catch sight of Antony. I think Adele would be too delighted to see him again to cry out. She must utter a cry, though. Yes, I understand, it sounds more moral. Come, go on, good dog. I began the fourth act. At the scene where the insult takes place, she put her hands round my neck and I felt her bosom rising and falling, as well as her heart beating against my shoulder. I could feel it almost bursting through her garments. At the scene between the Vicomtesse and Adele, where Adele 3 times repeats, "But I have done nothing to injure this woman," I stopped. Good Lord, man, why do you keep on stopping? She exclaimed. I stop because you are strangling me, I replied. Why, so I am, she said, but such things have never been done on the stage yet. Oh, it is too real, it is horrible, it stifles one, oh. But you must listen to the end, nevertheless. Willingly enough. So I finished reading the act. Oh, she said, you may be quite at rest, I can answer for myself. Oh, how feelingly I will say, she is his mistress. Your plays are not difficult to act, but they break one's heart. Oh, let me have my cry out. You great big dog, where have you learnt to know women like this? You know them through and through. Come, pick up your courage. We shall soon have finished it now. Go on. I began the fifth act. To my intense astonishment, although she wept much, it seemed to produce a less moving effect upon her than the others. Well, I asked. Oh, it is splendid, I think excellent. That is not the truth, you do not like it, really. Yes, I do. No, you do not. Well then, do you honestly want my opinion? Yes. I think the last act is a little too mild. See what differences of taste people have. Mademoiselle Mars thought it too strong. I wager it was not like this to begin with. No, I ought to confess it was not. She made you change it. From beginning to end. Come now. But if you like, I will alter it back again. Indeed, I do wish it. Oh, it will be easy enough to do. But when can you do it? Tomorrow, or the day after, or some day. She looked at me, turned my chair round on one of its legs, and fell on her knees in front of me. Do you know what you ought to do, good dog? She said. What ought I to do, tell me. She took out one of her little combs, and began combing her hair while she talked. I will tell you, you ought to rewrite that act for me this very night. I am willing, I will go home and set to work. No, without going home. Why? Listen, Merle is in the country. Take his room, they shall bring you some tea there. From time to time I will come in and see how your work goes on. You will have finished by the morning and will then come and read it to me by my bedside. Ah, that will be most delightful. What if Merle should come back? Bah, we would not let him in. Very well, you shall have your act tomorrow before your breakfast. Oh, good dog, how very charming you are, but you know. She raised her finger. Since it is agreed between us. All right, what are you going to do this evening? Will you have supper first or begin working? I prefer to set to work. She rang. Louise. Louise came in. Well, madame again, she asked. Number, make a fire in Merle's room. But monsieur said he would not return. It is not for him, but for Alexander. The maid looked at me. Yes, said I, it is all right, it is for me. Oh, how funny, she said, but. You see, I said to Dorval, it is improper. You need not be shocked, Louise. He has a bill of exchange and fears arrest at his own house tomorrow morning, so he will sleep here. That is all, only you must not mention it. Worthy Dorval, she could only think of two motives for not sleeping in one's own home, a mistress or a bill of exchange. Oh, said Louise, all right, I see it ought not to be spoken about. Specially not to M. Leconte, you understand, the more so that there is no harm in it. Louise smiled. Oh, madame takes me for an ordinary lady's maid, I suppose. Has madame any other orders for me? No. Louise went out. We were left alone. I, as always, filled with admiration for that naive, impulsive-natured woman who ever obeyed the first instincts of her heart, or the first dictates of her imagination. She, like a gleeful child who takes an unexpected holiday, or tastes some hitherto unknown pleasure. Then she stood up before me, unaffectedly, in attitudes delightfully natural, and in fittingly sorrowful accents. She went through the whole of her part, without forgetting one salient feature in it, saying each word as she felt it, with striking correctness, bringing out effects, even in the most commonplace of my scenes, those which were put in merely as connecting links with the main ones, that I never thought of when I wrote them, and every now and then, jumping for joy and clapping her hands and exclaiming, Oh, you will see, my good dog, you will see what a grand success we shall make of it. Oh, splendid personality, which death thought to obliterate when it struck her down in my arms. I swore the memory of her genius should not be destroyed by death. I will make thee live again, as I promised thee, and as those who had a right to exact a false version from me have authorized me to tell the truth, I will indeed do so. At every flourish of my pen thou shalt rise from the dead, throbbing with life, with the womanly weaknesses that belong to thee and the qualities which made thee the artist thou wast. Exactly, in short, as God created thee, without veil or mask. To treat such a personality like any ordinary being would be to insult thy genius. Louise re-entered in a quarter of an hour's time. Everything was ready in Merle's room. It was fated that I should from henceforth create my plays at the houses of those for whom they were intended. At 11:30, I set myself to work upon my fifth act. By 3 in the morning it was rewritten. By 9 o'clock Dorval was clapping her hands rejoicingly and crying, How I will act it, but I am lost. Wait a bit now here, my daughter, I must kiss my daughter, and then, kill me, and so on to the end. Then you are quite satisfied? I should think so, indeed. Now we must send and fetch Bocage to breakfast with us and hear it all. I knew very little of Bocage's talents. I had only seen him act the cure in El Incendiaire, and the sergeant in Napoleon a Schönbrunn, two roles which did not at all assist me to imagine him in Antony. I was, therefore, prejudiced against him, and spoke of Lockroy and of Frederick, of the ease with which we could obtain the services of either of them at the reopening of the theatrical year. But Dorval stuck to her point. She maintained that Bocage was the only actor who could give to Antony the necessary appearance suitable to the part of Antony, so she sent to fetch him. Bocage was then a handsome fellow of about 34 or 35, with dark hair and fine white teeth, and beautiful mysterious eyes, which could express three things essential on the stage: roughness, determination, and melancholy. Among his physical defects were that he was knock-kneed, his feet were too large, he had a dragging gait, and he spoke through his nose. As Dorval's letter was urgent, he rushed off to us at once. We breakfasted, and afterwards I read Antony through again. Well, what do you think of it, Bocage? Dorval asked. Directly I had pronounced the concluding words. She resisted me, so I killed her. Upon my word, replied Bocage, I really hardly know what I have been hearing. It is neither a play, nor a drama, nor a tragedy, nor a novel. It is something of them all, and certainly most striking. Only, can you imagine me as Antony? You will be superb, replied Dorval. What do you say, Dumas? I know too little of you to say anything, but Dorval knows you and is ready to answer for you. Good, but I should need a special makeup for the part. I could not act it in ordinary everyday clothes. Oh, don't trouble yourself about that, I replied. We will discover a suitable costume between us. What is our next move? You must inform Crosnier that you have just been listening to a drama that suits you and Dorval, that it is by me, and that I am willing to sign the same agreement with him that Hugo did. Capital. But understand, Bocage, there must be no official reading before acceptance. The piece is to be taken whatever happens. There can be a semi-official reading to the manager after its acceptance. All right, I understand. Dispense with reading before the other members of the company. You bring your plays and they are simply to act them. What are your terms? The same as Hugo's. It shall be settled tonight. I took a cab and went to tell Hugo what had happened. I received a little note from Bocage that very evening. It only contained these few lines. I have seen Crosnier. It is all settled. You are to read tomorrow at 11 a.m. in his office semi-officially. He quite understands. Yours, Bocage. Next day I presented myself at the appointed hour to M. Crosnier. I scarcely knew him, for I had only seen him once or twice. He had taken a third or fourth share in 5 or 6 pieces, amongst others, in a parody of Schiller's intrigue, Et Amour, played under the title of La Fille du Musicien. I do not even know whether this piece, which was very successful, was not acted later than the time I am now talking of. He was an accomplished, clever man, with fair hair and little of it, grey eyes, a mouth but scantily furnished with teeth, and his manners were nice and affable. He has since amassed a very large fortune, I believe, to which his relations with Cave have done no harm. In conclusion, his was exactly the temperament to understand La Petite Ville, and the least suited to understand Antony. I began my reading. By the 3rd act, M. Crosnier was politely striving against his drowsiness. By the 4th, he was sleeping as comfortably as possible. By the 5th, he was snoring. I went out without his hearing me do so, I have no doubt. Bocage was waiting for me in the salon to hear the result of the reading. I showed him his sleeping manager through the half-open door and left him a receipt for 1,000 francs. According to our agreement, M. Crosnier owed me 1,000 francs for the reading. Diable, exclaimed Bocage, is the agreement signed then? No, but I have your letter of yesterday's date, which is as good as a contract, and I will await your reply at Dorval's house. Bocage alone could divulge what passed between himself and Crosnier. I fancy there was some friction between them. However, half to 3/4 of an hour later, he arrived at Dorval's house with the 1,000-franc note. But Crosnier deferred the play for 3 or 4 months. He did not wish to risk his winter's successes with a work he considered so uncertain of pleasing the public. Never mind, certain or not, that will not prevent its making money, my good dog, I will answer for that, said Dorval. So that is the story of Antony, of its withdrawal from the Théâtre Français and its appearance at the Théâtre de la Porte Saint-Martin, with your humble servant as its father, and Bocage and Dorval as its godfather and godmother. End of vol. Roman 4.